Messages from the House.
From the House of Representatives, message number 170, January 31, 2023. Mr. President, the following bills passed the House on third reading in an amended form by the votes indicated. House Bill number 30, Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program amendments, ayes 37, noes 25. Message number 174, January 31, 2023, House Bill number 161, Loan Disclosures for Guarantors and Co-Signers, ayes 54, noes 8. Message number 171, January 31, 2023. Mr. President, the following bills passed the House on third reading by the votes indicated. House Bill number 35, Daycare Certification Requirement Amendments, ayes 56, noes 6. Message number 172, January 31, 2023. House Bill number 57, Armed Forces Amendments, ayes 61, noes 1. Message number 173, January 31, 2023. Mr. President, the following bill failed to pass the House third reading by the vote indicated. House Bill number 149, Protection of Healthcare Workers, ayes 28, noes 34. Signed, Katie Talbot, House Chief Clerk.
Randy, reports from standing committees.
January 31, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 157, Weed and Pest Mitigation Tribal Inclusion 2, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Garou, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman. January 31, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs, to whom is referred Senate File 164, Public Improvement Contract Requirements Amendments, respectfully reports back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Pappas, Acting Chairman. January 31, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 131, Prohibition on Delivery of Unsolicited Ballot Forms, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. No, Senator Barlow. Senator Case, Chairman. January 31, 2023, Mr. President, Committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, to whom was referred Senate File 153, Election Security, respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Barlow, Boner, Case, Landon, and Scott. Senator Case, Chairman.
Thank you, Randy. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that. Excuse me, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate File 153, Election Security, has an appropriation. I ask that be re-referred to Committee number 2 at this time.
Without objection, so ordered.
You're welcome.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Minority Floor Leader Rothfuss.
Committee of the Whole will please come back to order. Yes, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
The privilege of the floor.
The privilege is yours.
Just to give you a little purview of what we have coming up today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to try to get, we got 2 bills cranked out this morning. So the target, so to gauge your debate, the target is to get 15 more done this afternoon. And so if you guys want to stay here till 7 or 8 to get 15 more bills done, we can do that. But Mr. Chairman, that's the target. Plan your debate accordingly. Let's see if we can move some of this stuff along so all of you get a chance to get your bills heard. Mr. Chairman, we will sometime around 4 o'clock take a 10-minute break.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. With that, the first bill for our consideration is going to be Senate File 129. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 129, Background Checks, Governor's Office, sponsored by Senator Landon, an act relating to criminal history records. was referred to committee number 1, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the Senate, when the Committee of the Whole writes the report, that it does so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 129, background checks, Governor's Office. Mr. Chairman, this is a little bill that came as a result of a conversation and ultimate request from our chief executive to take a look at something which was fairly commonplace up until about 4 years ago. And our federal partners decided at some point that because we did not specifically give this kind of authority to our governor, that he was not to be able to request of that federal agency the help in a background check. Well, the governor's office receives and handles all kinds of confidential information, Mr. Chairman, and it's actually, I think, pretty important that we give him this statutory authority. So that's what this little bill does. It goes into 3 different spots in our statutes in order to accomplish that. And so I'll walk you into the bill real quickly. If you look at 719-106, that's the list of agencies and departments that even have the right to review this information if it is received. And so we make sure that the governor is included in that long, long list, which includes, for example, the Department of Health, the Secretary of State, many of our boards that we refer to. If we go to 719-201, that too is a very long list of persons who shall be required to submit to fingerprinting if they're going to be a part of that particular agency or entity. And that includes the governor's office there. If you go over on page 3, there again, that provides the authority to obtain those criminal background histories for employees, which would include interns, et cetera. That's a really quick run through. I think we can stay on time with this one, Mr. Chairman.
Hope
I'd
so.
be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any questions or discussion on Senate File 129? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 129, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 129 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is Senate File 43. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 43, EMS Districts, sponsored by Senator Case, an act relating to improvement and service districts, was referred to committee number 10, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, and Dockstader. No, Senators Bouchard and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 43, EMS districts do pass. There's an amendment, if we can get it read in, please.
Let's have it read in.
Senate File 43, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, page 1, line 10, after.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you very much for an explanation of the bill and the amendment. I will turn to Senator Case.
Excellent. Senator Case, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd go ahead and move the Standing Committee Amendment to Senate File 43 and just kind of handle them both together, Mr. Chairman. So Senate File 43 goes into our improvement district statute. So we have an ability in Wyoming by citizens petition to make an improvement and service district. It has lots of different things that it could be used for. One of the things that it can be used for is to provide EMS services. Now, that is a special district created by the petition of the people. This bill tweaks that a bit. We also have a special district like, for example, a solid waste district. It's actually under the auspices of the county commissioners, Mr. Chairman, so that the county commissioners establish the board of the solid waste district, and mill levies have to go to the voters. Let me be clear about that. But it's actually the county commissioners that organize the district. So what this bill does, everyone, is to take the improvement district idea and carve out for EMS that the county commissioners can establish a district. So that's the purpose of the bill. That's what happens. It does not change the fact that the county commissioners cannot levy a mill levy. And the bill provides up for four mills, but the commissioners can't do that. They can appoint the district, but then they have to submit the proposition about mill levies to the voters. And so it gives the county commissioners another tool to be able to provide ambulance services in their county. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Chairman, but in my county, EMS services are a really big deal. We don't have a major hospital like our biggest counties do, and transportation is, we are the second biggest county in the state, and we, we have to try to provide ambulance service is a losing proposition. And just to talk about the challenges of ambulance for just a minute, the old days for a lot of counties are long gone, where EMS services were provided by volunteers, and they weren't necessarily heavily trained, they were very dedicated, but trying to get a volunteer ambulance service to run in a modern county, people just expect more, Mr. Chairman. But don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of good volunteers out there providing ambulance service in Wyoming, and some of them are better than others. We moved away from that model in Fremont County and went to contracting, and we've gone through a couple of different contractors, but it's expensive. From Du Bois to Atlantic City, that is probably 125 miles. And then you've got clear out to Shoshone, and Lysite, and we have oil field operations and industrial plants. And we need to cover the whole county. So this bill provides a way for a district to be established, mill levies to be raised to provide that service. I'm not saying it's the key for every county, but it would allow a county to decide to do this. Now, Mr. Chairman, just by way of, the bill is crafted to it kind of goes into the improvement district language, and it carves out a second way to establish a district for just EMS services. So if you look on page 2, the original language was just that single paragraph. It's under 1812-105, and this is the proceeding for the formation of a district shall be commenced by filing a petition. Well, they've got to put the exception in there, and that's what this does. So proceedings for the formation of an improvement and service district under this act, except a district to provide emergency medical services for and pursuant to subsection B of this section, shall be commenced by petition. This allows subsection B, it provides for the alternative way to form a district for EMS services. And this is the key, after July 1, 2023, as an alternative to forming a district under subsection A of this section, a district to provide emergency medical services under WS 1812-112A Romanet 22 may be established by resolution of the Board of County Commissioners. A resolution under this subsection shall establish one or more districts to provide EMS services composed of any portion of the county or the entire county, Mr. Chairman. Areas may be added or subtracted from an existing district by resolution of the board not less than 60 days before any resolution pursuant to this subsection is signed. The Board of County Commissioners shall submit the proposed boundaries of the district to the county assessor and the Department of Revenue for review for any conflict, overlap, gap, or other boundary issue. The assessor and the department may make written comments therein to the county commissioners. The Board of County Commissioners may dissolve a district established under this subsection in accordance with 18.3.525. Mr. Chairman, if you look right there at the first part of the amendment, and I did move the amendment, so it's we're bringing in the ability to, let me just look here. Page 2, line 22, after the shall, we'll say, hold a public hearing and publish the proposed resolution, including the date and time of the public hearing in a newspaper of general circulation in the county and on the county's website. The Board of County Commissioners shall, and it continues. That was brought by our county clerk about trying to provide more notice and transparency, Mr. Chairman. Page 3, line 4. And then after the word commissioners there, then it'd be before the public hearing. So the assessor and the department may make written comments there to the county commissioners before the public hearing. That's where that goes. So, Mr. Chairman, once again, it's just, each section of this is sort of how do we appoint the board of directors, because they're not elected in the other way. So except for districts to provide EMS services, blah, blah, blah. And that's going to be in subsection E. So we get down, D is also the exception, and except as provided by subsection E of this section. So then we get to bottom of page 4, line 20. This is subsection E that applies just to the EMS district, Mr. Chairman, that has the appointed board members. After July 1, 2023, if a district to provide emergency medical services is established under WS 1812-105B, the Board of County Commissioners shall appoint not less than 3, no more than 9 residents of the district to constitute the Board of Directors of the district. Appointees shall serve as a term of 3 years and may be reappointed. Terms of office shall be staggered. 1812-19, duty of county officials to levy and collect taxes. This is where the tax consequences come in, Mr. Chairman. And we'll just go down to, it's part B, but down to line 16. If the district was formed under WS 1812-105A and is providing EMS services under WS 1812-112A 22, the tax for the district shall not exceed in any 1 year the amount of 2 mills on each dollar of assessed valuation of the property, unless up to an additional 2 mills is approved by the Board of Directors, and if approved by the electors as provided in subsection C of this section. Approved by the electors, Mr. Chairman, the tax has to be approved by the electors. If the district was formed under WS 1812-105B and as a district to provide EMS services, the tax shall not exceed 4 mills, and if the mills are approved by the Board of Directors and approved by the electors. So it's a 2-step process. So anyway, Mr. Chairman, I'm getting coaching here. It's always good. You know, Senator Landon never used to do a lot of coaching. He really did. But
It's
and
handy.
I need
Senator
coaching.
Case.
I will tell you that I need coaching. I think you get it, Mr. Chairman. So why would we want to do this? You know, I served as the chairman of the Special Districts Task Force a few years ago. That was like the Battle of the Bulge kind of for a 2-year period. And we learned a lot about special districts, and people are kind of, you know, you can be a knee-jerk against special districts. We have a lot of them. They serve great purposes, a lot of people involved. But the ones that are totally independent are a little bit cumbersome, Mr. Chairman. And they have a hard time keeping their budgets together sometimes. They don't make all the deadlines. Having the board of directors be responsible to the county commissioners, in essence, tightens it up a little bit. It's a little less free-flowing in the district. There's more budgetary control, and I think you get better outcomes. And I think I'd be happy to answer any questions. We do have the standing committee amendment. Maybe we should do it now.
That's a good idea. Thank you, Senator Case. We are on Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 43. Are there any questions or discussion on the amendments? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Case's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 43, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. That amendment has been adopted. We are back on the bill discussion on Senate File 43. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just real quickly, many of you know I have roots that run very deep in Fremont County, and I just wanted to rise and commend the senator for a creative attempt to take care of something that has been a real issue in Fremont County for a long time. We have an entity in my neck of the woods that actually operates the little clinic up in the northern part of Fremont County in the little town of Du Bois. And they told me when I met with them on a separate issue and we got to talking about it, that that little community is the most isolated community in the lower 48. So if you let that sink in for a minute, they literally are 78 miles away from the nearest anything. My mother actually went down, and we were very fortunate to get her to the senator's hometown to be stabilized and on to New Mexico at that time for some serious surgery. But anyway, this is, not all of us favor special districts. The senator's right, but this one, that is a very unique county, is what I'm trying to get to. And some real challenges, and I think this is really a good attempt at that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Landon. Further discussion, Senator Dockstader.
Mr. Chairman, and I commend the senator for finding solutions to emergency response. So we put together something similar to this maybe 8 years ago, created something because we had an area that wanted to park an ambulance closer to a community that was a little further away from the healthcare access. And the way the good senator explained it, this perhaps tightens it up a little further as far as the county's involvement. So it adds to it. And I guess a question for the senators, I thought about this following his presentation to the committee. Was there any thought that and I understand it's private health care providing the hospital services in that county, any thought that they might pick up the tab for something like this? In my area, in my colleagues' area, we have hospital districts that not only provide the hospital services, but they ensure that there's adequate first response, EMS services, places to park them, and they've upped it even to the point where it's not just a volunteer. We've got, as I understand it, you rise to a paramedic level. They've taken it up a notch or two so that the people who show up at the scene to help are well trained. Is there any thought that the hospital might help pick up the tab for this? Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Senator Dockstader. Any further questions before the proponent rises? Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just had a question on why the Board of Directors was picked as a way of managing this. I come from the largest county in Wyoming, and I do agree it's an issue, but I think when we get away from people that are elected, because once the Board of County Commissioners has a Board of Directors, I will tell you from being a county commissioner, you will lose control. And it's a tough decision to rein that in, and a very difficult one. So I would like to hear why we wouldn't want to have an elected board managing this district. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Perhaps one more before the proponent rises. Anyone? Seeing none. Back to you, Senator Case, on Senate File 43 EMS districts.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First, with my good friend from Star Valley and the hospital issue, Mr. Chairman, we're kind of unusual in that both the Riverton and Lander hospitals are private hospitals. Now that's evolving because there's a new proposal for a hospital in Riverton. It's received some funding and it's going to be associated with a healthcare facility in Billings. But it's the hospitals, the history of the hospitals, they didn't used to even be owned by the same corporation. They are owned now. So I suppose that's one point of organization that you could think of. They're a for-profit hospital. I don't think they're really excited about providing EMS services. I will say that EMS services doesn't seem to be much of a moneymaker in my county. We have a very broad range of different people. We have high utilization. We serve the reservation. We serve other poor parts of the county. We rely on people to pay their fees, and they get charges, but that's not always collected. We have an extremely high level of transport. So if something is too big for the hospitals to handle, you're going to get probably life flighted, but possibly ground transported out of Fremont County. You'll go to Billings, Casper, sometimes Cheyenne, often Salt Lake. It's and unfortunately, it sometimes happens for maladies that are common and should be handled at the hospital, but you get to the hospital, you go to the emergency room, and the hospital doesn't have the coverage because they don't have the nursing staff or other staff to actually accept you, so you get flown out anyway. So the public hospital that's going to be developed in Riverton, and I have great support for that and faith in that, it doesn't serve the whole county, so it might be a fractional thing. There's no district established yet. It could possibly have a district that might take on these deals, but right now it seems very intractable. With respect to my good friend, the former county commissioner, I respectfully disagree, Mr. Chairman. We have, and in my time at the Special Districts Task Force, we found a difference between districts that are independently elected and districts that were more closely associated with the county commissioners, that their responsibility to the budgeting requirements and timeliness and openness was better when the county commissioners were able to have a little bit more influence on the district, specifically approve their budgets and be able to, in this case, we're providing that we can even, the county commissioners can dissolve the district. If that is, and so they can create it, they can dissolve it, they can change the boundaries, they make the appointments, and of course, all those budgetary things. We passed a bill reforming the budgetary things for solid waste in other districts a few years ago. They do come through the county commissioners. So it's actually more control than a totally independent elected district that has an independent constituency and their own control over all these factors. I think it's maybe the right merger of direction from the county commissioners and the ability to have a district. We need to have a board of directors to levy the tax. That's clearly in the law. If we don't have that, then the county commission is only limited to 12 mills under our Constitution. So I hope that's helpful. Happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you, Senator Case. Any further discussion? Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I know it's existing statutes on page 2, but given any thought, the way that's structured in that first paragraph, it just says a petition addressed to the commission with the proposed boundaries. So just one individual, the way I read that, could petition the commission. So it's not a majority of the landowners or any it could be one individual. And so just your thoughts on that bringer of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Any additional questions before the proponent rises? Any further? Back to you, Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, I believe in existing statute, there's more framework around that. And let me look and get back to the good senator and on that issue. But I think that's a standalone paragraph, but more requirements about the petition are contained elsewhere in statute under this district.
Thank you, Senator Case. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 43 EMS districts, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 43 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for your consideration is Senate File 154. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries, sponsored by Senator Cooper, an act relating to the Wyoming Energy Authority. It was referred to Committee Number 9, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Cooper, Dockstader, Ellis, Jones, and Rothfuss. Senator Dockstader, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I recommend that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 154. To explain the good bill, Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These bills just get better and better as we go, don't they?
They sure do.
The little genesis on this project, it was brought to us by the governor's office as a tool to use for the WEA to use to go out and promote refinery growth in the state of Wyoming. One of the things that we learned this summer on the governor's gas and diesel pricing work group was we've got a real lack of refining in Wyoming. The bulk of our oil products go out of state to be refined, and then the finished product is brought back in. Has a lot of cost in trucking, and revenues go other places rather than the state of Wyoming. So we'd like to be able to promote to our refiners in Wyoming the idea of expanding their refineries. So with that, we have Senate File 154 here. What this does is gives the Wyoming Energy Authority the ability to, which they already have, some people say, but the ability to support efforts to maintain and expand the oil and gas industry in Wyoming through constructing and facilitating this expansion of existing oil and gas refineries in Wyoming. So the bill is pretty straightforward. It says just exactly that in two different places. And it'll be used as a tool for the Wyoming Energy Authority to go out and try to sell these projects across the state. Now, it adds this language into the existing statutes, which is 37-5-503 by adding a new paragraph, and 37-5-602. Pretty straight up stuff. There is a standing committee amendment.
Let's read that in.
Senate File 154, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 11, delete.
Senator Cooper, would you move that amendment?
I'd like to move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File SF 154 and ask for your consideration. The amendment is real simple. It's a one-line deal. It adds some language that was brought to our attention that possibly was missing. On page 2, after line 10, it adds paragraph B of the amendment. And then within that paragraph is one line. It says, and mineral processing and concentration facilities consistent with the purpose of 37-5-503. So it adds that language to the pipeline and transportation part of it that says we can do this. Now, there was a question in standing committee that, is this the right place for this amendment? This is where LSO told me they thought it fit well. I looked into it. I can't see that it makes a lot of difference in one place or the other, but I'm open to suggestions if the bringer of the question wants to move it around. So that's the whole bill. It's real straight up. It's just a sales tool for us to use to promote expansion or construction of new refineries within the state of Wyoming.
Thank you, Senator Cooper. We're on Standing Committee Amendment Number 1. Is there any question or discussion, Senator Ellis, on the Standing Committee Amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question that the good senator is discussing is mine. We're wanting to make sure that we're covering all the places where we see this kind of phrase, pipeline and other transportation and distribution projects and mineral processing and concentration facilities. As I'm doing a quick look on our statutes in this, I apologize, members, I just didn't get a chance to follow up with this. There might be some other areas where we need to make some conforming amendments to make sure that this language is consistent throughout. So I will visit with LSO and other committee members, but maybe bring a second reading amendment. But that was my question.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just think on the standing committee amendment, if you go to line 11, I think there may be a technical correction that needs to be there. So that reads now, which may be located within or without the state of Wyoming. I'm not so sure without the state of Wyoming is appropriate. So just need a technical correction on that standing committee amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. Any further discussion on the Standing Committee Amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Cooper's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 154, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 has been adopted. We are back on the bill. Is there any discussion on Senate File 154, Energy Authority Project Financing Refineries? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question of the bringer of the bill, just for my interest more than anything else. Have we built any new refineries in the last, I don't know, decade? And does he also maybe have an idea if there are some that are thinking about expansion?
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Any further questions before the sponsor rises? Any further questions? Seeing none, back to you, Senator Cooper.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. Could I get the good
Have there
senator-
been any refineries built in recent history in Wyoming, Senator Cooper?
Thank you, sir. I would say it's probably been 60, 70 years since there's been a refinery built in Wyoming, realistically, or even an expansion. They've been refit a little bit, but there's been absolutely zero growth. In fact, it's gone very much so the other way.
Thank you, Senator Cooper. Any further discussion? Senator Dockstader, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we're trying to do here is lay the groundwork, make it a user-friendly environment in the state to bring them home to Wyoming and do their business right here. So that's what we're trying to do with this bill.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Further discussion? Senator Anderson, to you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the attitude of the nation is to decrease the number of refineries. We still have a lot of them around the Gulf of Mexico, but we're down in Wyoming. Central Wyoming used to have 4 refineries right there. Now we're down to 1. So this bill is to help them expand if they can. I don't know if we'll ever get a new one built, but if we could expand what we have in the 3 or 4 that we have in the state, it would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Further discussion on Senate File 154? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Dockstader's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 154, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 154 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 167. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings Remote Appearance, sponsored by Senator Nethercott, an act relating to domestic violence protection. Was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Case, Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Senator Landon, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What's your pleasure, Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings Remote Appearance. And for an explanation of this bill, I would ask that you call on Senator Nethercott.
I will call on Senator Nethercott. Senator Nethercott.
Just making sure my coach is ready, Mr. Chairman. He is. Good senators, you have a good little bill in front of you which allows for the remote appearances of either the petitioner or the respondent or both, allowing them to ask the court in the case of a domestic violence protection order hearing, purely at the court's discretion, but does allow, kind of as part of that process, either party to request to appear remotely, just kind of avoiding the inherent dangerousness associated with when and how these hearings occur. There is a Committee of the Whole amendment, good senators. Can I have that read in?
Senate File 167, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 2, delete.
I move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 167 and ask for your favorable consideration. Good senators, this amendment also allows for these remote appearances to occur in also stalking petitions, stalking order cases, and also sexual assault protection order type cases. So just really hitting the full gamut there for those 3 types of hearings that are very similar in nature and closing out that loophole. So it makes good sense that there's consistency there. With that, I'd stand for questions on the amendment.
We're on the Committee of the Whole amendment. Are there any questions, discussions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Nethercott's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 167, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 has been adopted. Back on the bill, Senator Nethercott.
Happy to stand for questions.
Questions and discussion on Senate File 167, Domestic Violence Protection Hearings Remote Appearance. There's no discussion. Question's been called. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 167, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 167 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 101. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendment, sponsored by Senator Ide, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, French, Ide, McEwen. No, Senator Pappas. Senator Beitman, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, could we stand at ease of the sound of the gavel? We've got our revenue committees off for one of the members of the revenue committee to reorganize that, so give the staff a chance to get caught up. So stand at ease to the sound of the gavel.
All right, we are at ease until the sound of the gavel. The Committee of the Whole will please come back to order. That was the sound of the gavel. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
All right, it's finally updating. So now it's reflecting, I think, what we've got. Let me check
right.
with the chief clerk just to make sure.
All right, we are all in order. We had read in Senate File 101. It had not been moved. Therefore, there's not a motion on the floor that is being retracted at this time and will be moved down the list until later. So with that, the next bill for your consideration is Senate File 155. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 155, Education Teacher Resources, sponsored by Senator Scott, an act relating to school finance. It was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Scott, and Steinmetz. No, Senator Rothfuss. Senator Beitman, acting chairman.
You have heard the reading. What is your pleasure, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I move when the Committee of the Whole rise and report it do so with a recommendation that Senate File 155 do pass. There was no standing committee amendments. And, Mr. Chairman, I will explain the bill. Mr. Chairman, this is an effort at education reform, and let me go into a little bit the background as to why it's here. Mr. Chairman, we have a problem, and I can explain it best by reading a few short pieces from the recalibration report that the legislature paid for, 2002 recalibration, Wyoming's Educational Resource Block Grant model, the final report that was submitted to us by our consultants. And it says on page 3, it has a table, and it says it would be reasonable to expect significant improvement in student performance after this noticeable funding increase. He's talking about the funding increase that appeared in previous recalibration. It says, as shown in Chapter 2, data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP test, suggests improvement in student performances have not grown at the same pace as the growth in educational revenue for Wyoming. Now that the NAEP test, Mr. Chairman, is the one given by the United States Department of Education. It gives us data on how we're performing, gives data across the whole country. Very highly respected test. And then he's more explicit in the report, reading from the provision starting in the bottom of page 11. He talks about the results on the YTAP tests, both third and fourth grade, and in mathematics and reading. Says, put differently, table shows that between 44.6% and 46.5% students perform only at the basic or below level in mathematics. And I'll add parenthetic, one of those figures is fourth grade and one of them is third grade. And between 50.88 and 45.2% of students perform at only the basic level or below in English language arts. And that's reading. And then key sentence. These performance levels are not adequate for graduates to access jobs in the higher skill, higher wage economy that Wyoming is trying to build. So, Mr. Chairman, that's what our consultant has told us about the overall performance of our education system. And we're seeking, Mr. Chairman, to find out what the causes of those problems are and to get something done about it. And this is part of that reform effort. What this bill does is
It goes into the block grant and says that the monies appropriated or money set forth in the block grant for teacher salaries and benefits cannot be shifted to other purposes, Mr. Chairman. And that's important because the best evidence we've seen is that significant amounts of them are shifted. And exactly what's going on there, Mr. Chairman, depends on how you read the Crew report, and it's difficult to fully understand what's happening, but it's clear that when we put in the block grant money for more teachers for smaller class size, that almost universally in the larger districts, that money is being diverted in part for other purposes. The other purposes include administration, include athletics, and then some of it is within the teacher's salary component from one set of teachers to another. We've got a problem there. What this bill does is says that you can't shift money out of the teacher's salary and benefits part of it to these other purposes, meaning that it'll have to be there to teach the kids, Mr. Chairman, which is the fundamental thing we're trying to do in education. So that's the bill. The first part of it is just very simple. It says exactly what I've been telling you. There's an exception for charter schools because that leads into some complications that would have been difficult to deal with. And then there's section 2 on page 3 of the bill, Mr. Chairman, is essentially we're asking the education department to figure out how do we go about enforcing this, what are the accounting changes that we will need to have, and exactly how the enforcement mechanism will work. I think it'll largely be self-executing, Mr. Chairman, but I think we do need to look at that and make sure it can be properly accounted for. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Any discussion on Senate File 155? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to ask the good bringer of this bill about data. Do we have data that, actually, there's some serious, I think, serious claims that were being made here about this cost shifting. And just like to, is there data to back that up that we could see before the next reading of this bill? I mean, I'm more than interested in hearing the good senator out on this, but I'd just like to see something. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Gru. Further discussion on Senate File 155, Education Teacher Resources. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just curious on a couple of fronts. The reading of a portion of the document that the chairman read from referenced the fourth grade YCAS rates. And I'm just curious how Wyoming's rates stack up against other states. The other question that I had is this shift that we've been told about. I'm just wondering if this bill covers things like the shifts that are required in districts like North Lincoln, Teton, some of our, even here in the capital city, where some of that shifting occurs so that higher salaries can be paid. I don't think that's a good idea if that's exactly what this is locking down. So a little more information on that front too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any further discussion before the sponsor rises? Seeing none. Senator Scott, back to you.
Mr. Chairman, there is significant amount of data that does indicate that there is, and we got into that last year in considerable detail when we were considering some of the, not last year, the year before, considering some of the recalibration efforts. I can try to dig that out if the LSO staff member who knows this data is not currently overwhelmed with budget issues. And I can try to get that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll see what I can do on that score. Mr. Chairman, trying to remember the exact questions. Mr. Chairman, with regard to the shifting so higher salaries can be paid, Mr. Chairman, that is a general problem in our whole education system. The districts are paying higher salaries than are shown in the modeling. This, in the resource grant, this bill doesn't change that because it would still allow shifting within the whole teacher component area. That would be, this bill doesn't interfere with that, and it doesn't interfere with bringing resources in from the outside. Mr. Chairman, what it does reach is if they take the money that's intended for teacher salaries and move it to some other purpose, like administrative salaries. And Mr. Chairman, the crew reports that I've seen, and the best I can, I've tried to go through those things, and they are very difficult to understand. The best I have seen is that both the administrative and the athletic components are significantly above what's provided for in the administration. And there are several sources, and this is one of them, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Further discussion on Senate File 155, Education Teacher Resources. Senator Landon, back over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real quickly, if there's any information that can be shared on that cost shift that occurs to athletics, I'd be very interested in that. That's a lot of my background, and I guess that surprises me. I spent a lot of years on the Education Committee. I've never seen that. And so I would really appreciate if the chairman could get us that. A better look at this shifting that's taking place would help me to get to where this bill wants to go. And I'll try to offline, Mr. Chairman, get back to the good chairman with regard to how Wyoming stacks up at that fourth grade level. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Further discussion on Senate File 155? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 155, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 155 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 173. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 173, Financial Institutions, Similar Names, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, an act relating to banks, banking, and finance, was referred to Committee Number 6, which turned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Guru, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 173 do pass. And there is an amendment, if that could be read in now.
Senate File 173, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 9, after.
And with that, I would turn the time over to our good president, who will explain the.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. President Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 173. Ask for your favorable consideration. Folks, I'm going to do the bill and the amendment together. I'm going to move it, but we'll run them together. Pay a lot of attention. This is a very detailed and technical bill. It started out as a one-word bill, and with the amendment, it is now a two-word bill, so we've moved it on. Folks, this is for when someone applies for a bank charter, get their name for the bank. In the old days, if you go to page 2 of the bill, it'll tell you, it used to say on line 7, name of the proposed financial institution does not resemble so closely as to cause confusion in the name of any other financial institution transacting business in the county. We've struck county and done state. So you can't have two banks in the state of Wyoming with names so much as to be confused, i.e. if you've got bank that sounds alike or could be confused with another one. And the amendment just moves it into the charter and to the banks as far as the special purpose depository institution we did, it does the same thing. So that's all this does, is just makes it where banks, you do a charter, you can't name one after a bank that's in your hometown to make it sound the same and have it look that way. And it's that simple. This is probably the only time you'll ever see a Driscoll sponsor name with a bank beside it. So with that, I'd ask for your favorable consideration on the amendment, and then we'll go to the bill and ask for that. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Senator Driscoll. All right, we are on Standing Committee Amendment number 1. Any questions, discussions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Driscoll's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 173, please say aye. Opposed, no. Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 173 has been adopted. We are back on the bill. Any discussion on Senate File 173? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 173, financial institutions, similar names, please say aye. Opposed, no. Senate File 173 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for your consideration is Senate File 176. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, an act relating to counties, was referred to Committee Number 6, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Ellis, Guru, Jones, and Schuler. Senator Schuler, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure, Senator Schuler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 176 do pass. And again, I would call on the good president to explain this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a day of tough bills for me. Fellow senators, I bring you solid waste disposal districts consolidation. This bill came out of a county next to my county up there, and good senator, I'm looking at the back from Goshen County's area. And what we had going on up there is we all know about special districts and how they run. And we had a county up there, they had a district walked in and threw the keys on their desk and said, we quit, we're not doing it anymore. Basically was not financially solvent. It was turned into a transfer station. And that same county, which I guess I can talk about on the floor here, it's Weston County, formed a big solid waste district that went all the way around this district and formed the tax base on it, and then hit the realization that really that both districts ought to be consolidated into one, and our state law didn't allow them to do it without fairly substantial election and notices, et cetera. What this bill does is says if you're not changing the boundaries of the districts, you don't change the members, and you don't change the tax amounts that one district can absorb into another district, makes it more efficient, makes it run better. So that this bill takes care of that. But in addition, we anticipated for what goes in the future, and it allows over county lines to consolidate districts. As we go forward, what we're finding, we've all been in here, Mr. Chairman, DEQ, we're closing down landfills right and left in the state of Wyoming. They tend to do transfer stations, move them. Part of them have special districts. It anticipates that you could have special districts across county lines that would want to consolidate, and so we do allow that. It does have to be done with the approval of both county commissions and with all of the, make sure there's no taxes or changes. With that being done, it just speeds the process up. This is really what we all look for in government. If you want to talk about consolidating it down, make it where there's less reports, less reporting in the paper, that's really what this bill does, is it makes it simpler to run, simpler to administrate, and runs on that direction. I would stand for any questions. If not, I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would anyone like to wade into this solid waste bill? Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd have two questions for the good chairman or the good president. One would be, do the districts, maybe more than two, says two or more, have to be actually neighboring? Can there be a separation if they're particularly in one county? And two, when I read the potential taxing authority, how you merge the taxing authority How does that work if one is taxed at a different rate than the other? Is it an averaging, or how is that handled? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Senator Dockstetter, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess the part about neighboring counties, we're doing this now. Hopefully we're legal, but we, but nonetheless.
You might want to vote aye, Senator.
Yeah, I'm thinking we are. I was just thinking that very thing. But we're crossing state lines, and we're doing it with some counties to the far west, just to the west of us. It's working very well, and it's saved a lot of money. And we're actually using the old landfill site to put up solar energy. And I thought, what a great way to use a stinky, smelly landfill is to turn it into solar energy. Then we create this big transfer station, tying it in with neighboring counties next door in the next state. And it's working very well, saving us a lot of money. It was a good move.
Thank you, Senator Dockstetter. Anyone else before we go back to Mr. President? Mr. President.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Great comment. I believe you earned me one vote because I can't answer unless you went to a special election and had all the people of all the districts vote for it. Basically, to do it, you can't do it. That's why these folks did this, is that is going to allow it. It can be more than 2 or more districts. And the way I understand it, no, they do not have to be contiguous. These districts, you could have one that lays here and you have a transfer station 40 miles away that picks up garbage. If they all agree that they want to do it, they do it. The beauty of this bill is, and it goes back to the good senator from Campbell County, tax rates do not change. That's the big part that we were very conscious of us in this bill, is if one tax is in one county and one's in another, or one district is there, even though it's consolidated, without a vote, you cannot change tax rates, change members, or change the way they operate. That was the only way that we could find agreement on this, was you don't want to bait and switch, because the whole thing with a special district, all the members are a majority, there's rules on how they follow. It's the only way you can form it. We're not trying to get around that. So if your tax rate is 3 mills and the district boundary is from road A to road Z and B to D, you can't change that area. You can't change the tax end of it. It's going to stay, even under the new authority. The taxing deal that your clerk, when they set the mills, still stays the same. If they're going to change that, and they can, that does require doing all the notices in the paper and going to the thing. So this really is, we heard the best sales pitch out of the back on why it works and what it's good for. He did it well. Thank you.
Thank you, President Driscoll. Any further discussion on Senate File 176, Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question to the president. He mentioned special elections. Do special districts always have to have special elections, or can they, you specify that they're done during the primary or the general elections? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Any further questions? Seeing none, back to you.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to use phone a friend in the corner, but I see he's gone.
Our friend in the corner is gone.
I'm not an expert on special or on the special districts, but I do believe anytime you do any major change in it, the board can deal with what they're chartered for. If you do any changes outside of that, you have to notice and have elections. They're really picky, because this is taxing people. It moves their tax rates up and down. So I think anytime you're doing something substantial, yes, it requires special election. Commissioners also have special powers to dissolve them and do other things. So I think for all of us that have been in here a while, we've been through this special district stuff, and it is much more difficult than most people understand. People that have been commissioners understand them a lot better than guys like I do. I can probably, if I'm going to Senator Kolb, I'll bet he can tell me lots about it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, to answer my colleague's question, it really depends on the nature of the special districts, whether they're a generally elected district or whether they're a special district that is a members-only district. Think maybe a water and sewer district. Those members only vote on that. You have other general elections that are statewide, or they're special districts that normally go through that. And some of those, and the one I'm most familiar with, there's a pretty arduous process. You have to petition particularly the Department of Agriculture that oversees that agency, and then that board has to approve it. So it just depends on the nature that we've got over 650 special districts out there. So depends on the nature of the special district, Mr. Chairman, is the answer to the question.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. Any further discussion on Senate File 176? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Schuler's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 176, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 176 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for your consideration is Senate File 139. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 139, unlawful use of a charge card or debit card, sponsored by Senator Kolb, an act relating to crimes and offenses. Was referred to Committee Number 8, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Boner, Brennan, Furphy, Kolb, and Pappas. Senator Boner, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation in Senate File 139. And to explain the bill, I refer to my colleague from Sweetwater County.
Thank you, Senator Boner. Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this is a simple bill. I hope as simple as we've heard earlier, although maybe my famous last words. So Senate File 139, the purpose of this bill is to update Wyoming Statute 63801A and add definitions for charge card and debit cards. The impetus of this bill originated from my county attorney, who had issues that came up on the lack of clarity because the types of conveyances of debit or charge are different than a credit card. So this merely updates this and adds it to statute. I'll leave it there and stand for questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sounds good. Thank you, Senator Kolb. Any discussion on Senate File 139? Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Boner's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 139, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 139 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for your consideration is Senate File 111. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 111, charge abuse, change of sex. I beg your pardon, child abuse, change of sex. Sponsored by Senator Scott, an act relating to crimes and offenses. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. No, Senators Baldwin and Barlow. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, I move one committee all rises to report and do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 111, child abuse, change of sex. For explanation of the bill, I would turn to Senator Scott.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I bring you a bill that we need to take quite seriously. It's in the criminal code area. And Mr. Chairman, let me say at the outset that if you believe the behavior that's described here is all right, you need to vote against this bill. If you believe, as I do, that it is a serious offense and doing considerable harm to the children that are affected by it, you ought to vote for the bill. And what the bill does is it makes part of our child abuse statutes the changing of the sex of a child, defining a child as anyone 18 under the age of 18, standard age of majority. Mr. Chairman, let me speak a little to the need for the bill. There is right now in the adolescent population right across the whole country a fad going on relating to these sex changes. It's being promoted by certain adults. And Mr. Chairman, what happens is there, as humans go into puberty, there is often a period where there is some confusion on this whole question of sexual identity, gender identity, whatever you want to call it, normal, part of growing up. It's something new for the kids. They're feeling emotions they haven't felt before. And there's often some confusion. And sometimes they get to thinking about the possibility of being of the different sex than what they were born as. Mr. Chairman, the information I have and what I've seen is that as the children grow up and get more experience with life and understand what it's all about better, most of them get over that phase, realize who they are, what they are, and are adjusted to it. And as they're biologically programmed to do, I think it's biologically programmed anyhow, they become quite content with the gender that nature has given them. But that's not always the case. And sometimes we've had adults that I think basically prey on these kids, persuade them to change. And frankly, it's when the child is below the age of majority, they have simply not had the experience with life or the maturity to understand what they're doing. And there's some very serious consequences to it, Mr. Chairman. An individual who's had their sex change, I understand they can never have a child of their own. That the change prevents that. And, Mr. Chairman, if you go all the way to change, it's not reversible as a practical matter. And it's also not fully complete because you can't change the basic genetics. That's each one of your cells has got either the 2X chromosomes that's female or the XY chromosome structure that's male, and that is not changeable. The sheer volume of it, if nothing else, makes it impossible. So, Mr. Chairman, the bill says that changing the sex is child abuse. And this is a different approach than I've seen in quite a number of states. I've seen some bills from elsewhere that go in and forbid all kinds of procedures and whatnot. This doesn't do that. This establishes the principle, and then that becomes a matter of legal proof. Somebody does it. Did they actually change the sex or not? It also doesn't seek to interfere in the legitimate practice of medicine. And Mr. Chairman, there are some exceptions. You see them starting on page 2, lines 8 and 9. The first one is for medical treatment in the very rare circumstance where somebody is born with ambiguous sexual sexual identity. That is very rare. It does happen. It needs to be treated. These are the ones that show up that tend to be gross deformities at birth. You got to do something. And typically the doctors and the parents get together and figure which is the best outcome. And that may depend on the individual circumstances. And they deal with it. So that's an exception. And then you have the next exception is where you have somebody born with the male XY chromosome structure and the female body plan, because the female body plan turns out to be the default development. That is again, Mr. Chairman, quite rare, but it's been publicized in a number of cases. It's often found older. Tests of athletes for use of improper substances will turn it up sometimes. Sometimes a young lady is not developing properly, isn't going to be able to have children. And they find, oh, that's the reason. That has to be dealt with. Most of that, Mr. Chairman, is after the age of majority, but not all of it. So that's an exception here that has to be dealt with. Third exception is where you have medical treatment for individual that develops a characteristic or so of the opposite sex. And there's a number of examples. A boy starts developing female breasts. That is a complication of certain diseases and of certain treatments for certain diseases. That can be dealt with. There's examples on the other side. A young lady develops too much facial hair. This exempts the treatments that are designed to just ameliorate the condition, not change the sex. Probably the bill, by the language of it, exempts those things. This just makes it clear. And then the final one is where you've had a violent accident, traumatic injury, you have some kind of life-threatening. I think cancers are the ones that probably cause most of the trouble. Again, fortunately, quite rare, but it does not include the mental diseases because the spectrum diagnoses, you could essentially defeat the whole purpose of the bill with that. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. Use your judgment on it. Are these things you approve of, or these are being done to children that don't understand the consequences? Or is doing that to a child abusive of the child? Mr. Chairman, I say to you, it's abusive of the child, and I'm hoping that a majority will agree with me.
Thank you, Senator Scott. We're on Senate File 111, Child Abuse, Change of Sex. Any discussion or questions? Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A fad. Okay, a fad. Hula hoops were a fad. Remember that. Mr. Chairman, I'm at a loss. I do understand that the world today is a confusing place. I understand that, well, we're not supposed to use props, but that item that's on most of our desks or in our pockets that we make calls to our family with has more information, more power than the power of computing that we use to go to the moon. It also has a way of disseminating information to us that is absolutely bizarre to me. And I know it's bizarre to a lot of people in this room, and I get that. It's new, it's different, it's a fad. The Beatles were a fad, I heard. My parents said, it'll pass. But now we're taking what the good senator called a fad, and now we want to make it a crime? Now we want to take what people do and they decide they want to be and turn it into a crime that is now, they'll put people in prison because we don't conform to what one person says is going to be my version of what you have to be, or you or any of the members of the 67th. That's what we're doing today. Last week it was common sense to be, third graders, so we got to watch out for them and their sexual orientation. That passed. Now it's to 18. We got mission creep in the middle of the session. A fad, which now we are going to turn into a crime. Well, I think the good bringer said it best. If you believe that, and we make fads, or we make what seems to be something that we don't quite understand and get a handle on right now, well, let's make it a crime. Let's throw people in jail for that. Well, we're going to need some more prisons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Further discussion on Senate File 111. Any further discussion? Senator Landon, to you.
Mr. Chairman, this is really the only opportunity we have to discuss this bill, and it's one of the more interesting bills I've seen in my 16 years here. Let me get this right now. So we're talking about any young person up to the age of 18. I don't know how much the good chairman has been hanging around with that group, but they're pretty mature. Anyway, consent of the child's parents, guardian, or any other person responsible for that child's welfare shall not be a defense to the crime defined in this subsection. So we're going to write in as a state government with our clipboards, and we're going to hammer a parent over something. I was looking at the good sponsors, all friends of mine, but I sure don't think any of them are experts in this field. Folks, we're building one heck of a state government down here. This is about the third or fourth time I've stood up to say, hang on a minute. Do we really want Cheyenne deciding for all of our citizens out across this state things like this? Making this a crime to take care of a young person that, for the grace of God, I've never had a child who had this kind of difficulty in life or tough choice to make. But that's up to state government to make that choice? Holy cow, folks.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Senator Case, to you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've been thinking about this a little bit. I've been kind of following it from afar. I understand there was quite a bit of testimony in the committee, and I understand that folks from the medical community were there. And what I gained from the news reports I heard on that was this really doesn't happen in Wyoming. And the medical community takes this extremely seriously. And that, I can't think of anybody that cares more about the welfare of their children than the parents. We often hear that in here. Don't let the state interfere with the relationship between parents and child. Make sure we have other educational alternatives available. Make sure the state, doesn't overly stick ourselves in the relationship between parents and children. We see it for when minors have medical procedures like abortion. We see it in other things. Mr. Chairman, I can't even imagine what this would really be like. But I know it's not easy on these families, and it's not easy on these children. And I know that our state of medical understanding is evolving. And I look for the science and the American Medical Society and folks, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used that proper noun, I apologize, the lead policy society for medical profession, to grapple with this, to come up with guidelines, just like they do on everything else, like when should you begin treatment for cancer? What treatments work? What are the guidelines for when you do this? How old do you have to be to do this? They work these things all the time, and they take into account the science and the evolution. And I trust that, actually. I'm not a doctor, well, doctor of economics, but that one doesn't count. And I'm not ready to go where this bill wants me to go, because I think kind of the whole world's on a journey here, and we're getting better at it. I'm told it doesn't happen in Wyoming, and I'm told that the testimony in the committee was by all the medical professionals was adamantly against this bill. Please, somebody reaffirm that, because I didn't watch the video and I don't know. Why are we doing this? If this isn't happening to Wyoming children, now I understand there's some confusion as well. There are a type of treatment called blockers, I'm no expert here, that delay the onset of some things to like puberty, for example, to help in certain circumstances. That's not sex change stuff. It is treatments that are common, maybe not so common, but can be very helpful. I can't imagine what it's like to be a mom or dad of a family and a child in a family where you're all making this journey together. And I don't know what the consequences of that journey are, but I know we don't need to be between them and the medical professionals. We don't need to be between parents and their children. This is a horrible place to be. And I hope we'll not pass this bill.
Thank you, Senator Case. Senator Hutchings, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill, I sat through the testimony and it was chilling listening to doctors talk about they love blood loss. That was scary to me. I didn't like that. I believe the good senator who proposed this bill is trying to help our children. There's something wrong here, and this is his way of doing it. I've heard a patient cured is a profit lost. Once this is done to a child, whether the puberty blockers or we start removing perfectly good breasts, perfectly good penises, you cannot reverse that, and no one has done that. The senator said this is not a complete surgery. It'll go on and on and on for the rest of their lives. If you look back at yourself at the age of 18, we all can say we've thought things and we've done things that we wish we did not do. And I can't see us taking a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, any year-old actually, and saying, I'm gonna do something to your body that's gonna match your mind. It's not gonna happen. Your mind is gonna forever feel like whatever it feels like, no matter what you look like, from what I've seen and heard. A teacher once said, we've lost our sense of ought-notness. This is something we ought not do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Senator Landon, will you come up here? Senator Boner, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, so just, I wasn't planning on weighing in, but I do feel the need to provide a little bit of information that I've got from somebody who I happen to know who's not in my district, but is a practicing medical professional who has confirmed that this is in fact happening in Wyoming. The story he shared with me is that the patient, in this case, a minor, had their new name called 4 times before they responded, as they were just getting used to that transition. So let's be clear, this is happening. Don't have any actual statistics as to the extent to which it is, but it is in fact happening. And I just urge folks to look not just to our own medical societies, but look to those maybe in, say, Scandinavian countries in Western Europe who have were on this idea a little bit before we were, and a lot of them have changed course and decide that maybe this isn't the best idea for kids. I just urge everybody to look at the entirety of our medical experience, maybe not just medical societies in this country, especially not in the state, who may not have as much experience as other parts of the world. So in support of the bill, for those reasons, I think it's an important conversation.
Senator Rothfuss, and then we'll go to Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understand and appreciate the concern for this community that exists in the chamber, but at the same time, once again, this comes down to the role of government and which relationships we should get involved with, which choices we should be involved with, and how often we want to override the interests of the parent of the individual. It's interesting that we've had as many pieces of legislation as we have had that really emphasize the importance of the role of a parent in raising a child and knowing what's best for that child. But here, in a circumstance where we're talking about gender identity, and because there's a concern and a statement that this, as noted, is a fad, is something that is disapproved of by some members of our communities, that now, in this circumstance, on this occasion, Mr. Chairman, we should step in and override parental rights, override the interests of the individual. It's up to us, the legislature, to step in that circumstance, to override Article 1, Section 38 of the Wyoming Constitution, which makes healthcare choices an individual freedom, to override Article 1, Section 2 of the Wyoming Constitution, which makes clear that all members of the state of Wyoming are entitled to that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness regardless of anything, any factor, including their sex and sexual orientation, gender identity. But here's a place where we somehow feel that we need to step in and criminalize every aspect of it. And the statement that that makes, Mr. President, the biggest concern I have, Mr. Chairman, is the implication that it's wrong. Not just a little wrong, felony wrong. That we're selecting a class, a wonderful class of humans, part of each of our community, part of this state, Wyomingites, and we're saying, you're so wrong in your beliefs, in your gender identity, that we want to criminalize it, and we wonder why this population is a leading population, a leading group in our state and in every state for suicide and for mental health struggles and challenges. It's because of this. It's because of these types of declarations where we want to act like this is abnormal behavior and unacceptable behavior, criminal behavior. It's not. This is a great issue for parents and families and doctors and medical professionals to come together and decide what's best for the individual, consistent with our constitutional rights and freedoms. This is not a place for the Wyoming legislature. Vote no.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, good debate, fellow senators, but I'd like to take us back to the fact that we set reasonable restrictions all the time. We're talking about minors here. We don't let them smoke, drink, drive a car until a certain time in their life, because all of those things could have huge consequences in their life. And so the governor or the government does step in and just set some boundaries occasionally, and that's all this is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski, and then we'll go to Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struggling to understand the world that I'm in now. It was much simpler when I came of age in high school, junior high. Something's going on in our society. And I think it is of concern and should be of concern. I'm going to resist attempts to label it as bigotry. I don't know if this bill's the right answer, but I am intrigued and moved by this recent news. Some of you may have seen it in the headlines out of Sweden. The Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare issued an update to its healthcare service guidelines for youth and children less than 18 with gender dysphoria, gender incongruence. They start first with this: these children need to be treated with dignity and respect. I think we all agree about that. We are not trying to criticize, label, put down anybody. The study contains 14 distinct recommendations with justification for each, referencing recently completed systematic review of the evidence. The NBHW concluded that the evidence base for hormonal interventions for gender dysphoric youth is of low quality, and hormonal treatments may carry risks. They also noted increasing reports of detransition and transition-related regret among youth who transitioned in recent years. They pointed to also, there's a poorly understood change in demographics. There's been a sharp rise in the number of youth seeking to transition that is unexplained. Also unexplained is there's a tilt towards a preponderance of females seeking to gender transition that is not well understood. They do go on to outline an exception, hormonal treatment appropriate, where there's been prepubertal onset of gender dysphoria that's long-lasting, persistent as adolescence, causes clear suffering, and that's allowed only in a clinical research context. So what this is, when it's appropriate, whom it's appropriate for, is all still very much under study. So I don't think we can be casual about saying if a child wants to transition and their parents are okay with it, we should be okay with it as well. I think we need to be cautious trading in this area. I do have issues with whether criminalization is the right remedy. I don't know what the right remedy is, but this dysphoria amongst youth is not well understood. And I'm just going to resist. I'm going to resist strongly when people express concerns about it, that somehow they're bigots. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kinski. Senator Nethercott? No. Senator Bouchard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The studies that, like the one just referenced, up to 95% of the children, if left alone and their diagnosis was actually taken care of, including other mental problems, issues, if they were diagnosed and treated, 95% would go on without any medical treatment as far as a scalpel or chemical therapies. And a very small percentage of those people would maybe have some homosexual tendencies, but they didn't need to change anything. And that's what these studies are finding over and over and over, Mr. Chairman. The young girls, the numbers are going off the charts. There are several websites that they gravitate to. And almost like predators, convincing them that they need to change their bodies, selling them things like chest binders, putting links to surgical solutions, cutting their breasts off, telling them this stuff at 12 years old. Some of the other operations they're doing is taking their female genitalia and turning it into what they say looks like a male. At best, it takes someone who would grow up with genitalia of looking like they were a toddler. It looks like something out of a Frankenstein movie when they do this stuff. We're allowing children to make these decisions, and we have a medical community, and even sometimes in schools, convincing the parents that if they don't do something like this, like something intrusive to their bodies, that they're going to commit suicide. But yet we're not looking at doing the medical treatments, the mental treatment, to try to figure out what's going on. That's what that study that the senator from Sheridan was just talking about. They're starting to look and see there's something wrong. if people, we're not saying here in this bill that we're going to let people, I mean, if they're 18, they can do it. Oh, these blockers, we're not even talking about the dangers of these blockers. I'm going to go off subject here for just a second in the animal world. They know that if they neuter animals, they get rid of their gonads, they develop health problems. Well, interestingly, that's what's happening with some of these blockers. They're basically chemically neutering. They're on a path to make the gonads go away. That has serious health implications for a minor. They are not being told that they're going to be patients for life, because that's what we're talking about here. Altering bodies to an extent that is going to cause grave harm. I challenge people to look at these studies. Some of them are as high as 95%. If they're left alone, they will go on to live productive lives without making changes to their bodies. On and for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Bouchard. Senator Scott, back to you.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very serious bill, a very serious subject. I will say to you, if we continue to allow it, significant harm is going to be done to a number of children. This bill is limited to children. It doesn't affect what adults can do to themselves. That's their business. But children are not mature enough to understand. And this child abuse is one place where we have historically overridden some of the parental rights because we have to protect the children. That's one of our duties. So we've heard the debate, Chairman, on both sides, and I will close as I started. That it comes down to whether you think the harm that's done to children is sufficient, we ought to protect them in this way, or whether you think doing that to children who really don't understand is acceptable. We've heard, Mr. Chairman, the debate up and down on this. And now it's time, Mr. Chairman, I call for the question.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Barrow, it's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was on the committee that heard this bill, and I voted no in committee. And I only mentioned one reason when I spoke to the bill at the request of the chairman, and that was change of sex. What does change of sex mean? Sex, gender, I would argue, and unfortunately somebody called for the veterinarian of the day earlier in their testimony. To me, that's a chromosomal issue. We're not going into the science. We can certainly talk about, I can talk about many conditions and environmental factors that affect, impact, or otherwise alter the genetic or the expression of genes in animals, which I do have some experience with. But I want to talk about two things. One, the sponsor brought up, and that is other approaches to this issue. In fact, a member of the medical community contacted me and said, I really do think this is an issue, but I wish it wouldn't be approached in this manner. I wish it'd be approached in the light of a liability upon those medical folks who would be preying or whatever we think it might be on these individuals. So what are those other options besides criminalization? And Mr. Chairman, I'm not a scholar of the law, but when we have an allegation of child abuse, I think the first thing we do is there's a determination whether all those people, around all those people, other people that are involved in this, and this would be parents, so this would be the siblings, this would be other folks in the household, this would be the doctor's family or the therapist's family or whoever, do these people need to be protected from these folks who might be perpetrating this child abuse. So all of a sudden, we've disrupted a whole bunch of families. Because this is child abuse, ladies and gentlemen, if that's what this bill passes. And what does that set in motion? What happens? What agency of the state of Wyoming then steps in? I think we do know who that is. And they do have a responsibility to protect. And then there's a determination whether it's guilty or a charge going to be filed, et cetera. But the first question is, do we need to protect people here? And they always err on the side of caution. And that's the way we should have it. But what other things set this into motion? The other thing, Mr. Chairman, I would throw out in that context is, how many children, with the current consent of their parents and a knowledgeable team around them, in love, respect, dignity, not because they're being predated, but out of real concern, are dealing with this right now? Are we going to just, with this bill passage, are we going to criminalize a bunch of folks who think they're doing everything in their power to love, respect, and support their child? And what are the consequences of that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Any further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 111, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Senate File 111 has passed the committee of the whole. Next bill for your consideration is Senate File, division was called, my apologies, I didn't hear it. Division having been called, all those in favor of Senate File 111, please stand. We can be sure to stay still, please. Okay, and you need to be in the chamber to vote, so if you're past the bar, you're not counted. Senators, in or out? Yeah. Okay, so he's out. Yep. Yeah, we got you, Senator. We've got it, all right. So, those opposed, please stand. Okay. Senate File 111 has passed the committee of the whole by a vote of 19 to 10. All right, the next bill for your consideration is Senate File 143. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz, an act relating to education, was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Beitman, Brennan, Scott, and Steinmetz. No Senator Rothfuss. Senator Scott, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Anderson, Kinski, and Salazar. No Senators Guru and Nethercott. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee of the whole rise and report it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 143 do pass. I believe there's no standing committee amendments, and I yield to the sponsor, Senator Steinmetz, for an explanation of the Senate file.
Thank you, Senator Scott. There is a standing committee amendment. I'll have that read in.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Senate
But
File-
we'll still yield.
Senate File 143, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 5, line 17, after.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Over to you, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will explain the standing committee amendment while I explain the bill. First, I'd like to just let you know what we're doing here with this good little bill. The Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Account is an ESA, or Education Savings Account program. They are funded with state funding from unrestricted sources. The ESA program funds are distributed to state-established accounts for the benefit of a child's education. Parents who request to participate in the program will sign an agreement with the state to use the ESA program account funding exclusively for their child's education as prescribed by law. Parents are bound by their agreement with the state. The state agrees to allow parents to choose the source of education for the child only upon parent agreement to follow the education requirements as outlined in the bill, which fulfill the basket of educational goods required because of prior litigation. The state retains control of the use of the funds while the parents choose the method to fulfill the basket of educational goods. Funds used for the ESA program is in no way aid or charity. ESA funding allows the state to deliver another educational opportunity to children. There is no constitutional restriction limiting the state legislature's authority to provide multiple means of education to Wyoming citizens. Nothing in the ESA program legislation alters the state's constitutional obligations to maintain a thorough and efficient system of public education after the ESA program becomes law. The public system of education will remain intact. The right to education in Wyoming is a right belonging to children. This right is not held by any school, public or private. Nothing in the ESA program alters the right of homeschool parents to educate their children in their home without public funding. The rights of homeschool parents are protected. Wyoming would be the 9th state to adopt an education savings account program. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will take you to the bill. If you go to your bill, you will see that definitions start on page 2 and 3. On page 3, an education savings account, or ESA, means the spending account for a child's education to which funds are allocated by the state treasurer, for which a parent of the ESA student enters into an agreement with the state treasurer to choose and pay for qualifying education expenses to the ESA student. An education service provider means a person or organization that receives payments authorized by the parent from the education savings account to provide for educational goods and services. This is very important because the parents are never touching the funds. The state treasurer is paying the actual education service provider. The eligible student means a child who is a Wyoming resident who is not who has not graduated from high school, received a high school equivalency certificate, or completed the equivalent of high school through a home-based educational program, who is eligible to attend public school in the state. And then a parent is a normal definition. On page 4, the qualified school means a non-governmental primary or secondary school that is located in or that provides education services in the state that does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. We had a question about that in the Appropriations Committee this morning, and that is basically in conformance with a federal statute is why that is stated that way. And then the state treasurer may also include an organization that the state treasurer has contracted with to carry out the purposes of this act. That's very important because he can use third-party administrators, which reduces the cost to the state substantially. With that, there is a list on your desk. There is information about education savings account. It's pink and white, and then there's also a list on there about the third-party administrators and who they are. I don't want to read that because those are proper names, but I wanted to let you know that those services are out there, they're readily available, and our good state treasurer is looking into to that as well. On page 5, it tells you how much the scholarship would be for. This is a scholarship, obviously, for K-12 children. It is $6,000 and annually adjusted by the state treasurer for the cost of inflation. On the bottom of page 5, on line 17, after this act through the end is where the First Amendment comes in. That deletes the automatic withdrawal from the legislative reserve account, stabilization reserve account, or the LISRA. This was modeled after our education finance law in the state of Wyoming, and we have a backstop on that. We are deleting that because we didn't think it was appropriate. On the next page, page 6, this shows you that if the scholarship program goes over $30 million or 150%, which would be $50 million, the fund will tip back into the school foundation program account. The next change we made was just on page, line 12 on page 6, we deleted monthly and put quarterly so that it was easier on the treasurer to administer the program.
Senator Steinmetz,
Yes.
can I get you to move the standing committee amendment real quick?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I would move standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 143 and ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you. Please continue.
Yes. With that, we just go into the governing contract, which starts on page 7. We have worked with that contract so that it is very tightly administered by the good treasurer so that we're complying with all state law, and we're making sure that parents are not getting any money directly or their family members, and that would be the next amendment on page 7, line 15. After facility, insert the tutoring services shall not be provided by an ESA student's immediate family. So we're just tightening that up, making sure that no individual citizens are getting the bill, the money from the bill. On page 8, one of the important things is on line 22. It does not include after-school childcare, so that is not an appropriate expense for this scholarship. If you go on to the requirements that fulfill the basket of goods are found on page 9, line 18. That is, it provides the fundamental instruction in at least reading, writing, mathematics, civics, history, literature, and science. That is our basket of goods, and so it fulfills that requirement as well. The next amendment you will see is on page 10. And on lines 9 through 12, we're just deleting that entirely because we didn't want, the school district isn't a part of this anymore when the student is removed there. On page 11, funds in an ESA shall not be refunded, rebated, or shared with a parent or ESA student in any manner. Any refund or rebate for goods or services purchased with an ESA fund shall be credited directly to the student's ESA account. So that's basically just making sure the funds are in the account and between the people that we're paying and the state, and it doesn't conflict with the parents, and students don't get in the middle of that. There's just a conforming amendment on page 12. And then on page 13, that amendment just basically makes it so that if there's someone enrolled in the program and there's limited funds, they would be given preference, them and their siblings, before new enrollees to the program, because we want to maintain consistency in the program. There's another deletion on page 14, lines 8 through 13. Just cleaning that up, and we inserted the word annually provide on line 5. On page 17, that's where the treasurer gets his administration fees. He gets 5% annually for the first 2 years and 3% maximum annually thereafter. Flipping to the next page. The next page that is important to note is on page 29. 50% of the amount to the Public School Foundation Program and 50% of the amount to the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Program account. And this is coming from the under the cap federal mineral royalties. That is because, which is, the cap is $200 million. That is because those are unrestricted funds, and constitutionally that makes it comply with our Wyoming Constitution. Next, on page 32, section 3, there is appropriated $30 million from the general fund to the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Program, and the account is created for the scholarship program. And basically, that is the bill. And I know we've run through it pretty quickly, but fairly thoroughly, because it is a big policy decision for the body and an important step for the state of Wyoming. So I am proud to bring you this good little bill today and would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Steinmetz. We are on Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 143, the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act 2. Are there any questions on the Standing Committee Amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 143, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 143 has been adopted. We are back on the bill. Discussion on the bill. Oh, excuse me, back to you, Senator Steinmetz, to close.
Yes, I just saw one more note I wanted to let you know. The $30 million would provide for about 5,000 scholarships in the state of Wyoming. And so with that, I'd stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we do have a Committee of the Whole amendment, but let's get questions on the bill first, and then we'll go to Committee of the Whole amendment. Go ahead, Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions. When I first read through the bill, I thought this basically probably pertained to homeschool kids and options for them, but I kind of just need to have some clarification. Would these ESAs be able to be used for parochial schools or private schools or church-type schools? I have a few other questions too, but that's the one that first came to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Additional questions before proponents stand? Senator Salazar, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much a question, but just comments. After reading this bill, I happen to like it. I like it. It deals with school choice. To the point of homeschool parents, I am thankful that this leaves homeschool children and parents out, and I appreciate that protection. I also agree. I think it's constitutional. It's a policy decision choice. I think my Senate district, my constituents support school choice. And I think that one size does not fit all. That's actually one of the reasons why my wife and I homeschool. And then finally, I guess my comment is that in the matter of education, parents are the best decision makers with how they want their children to be educated. This gives them choices. And I believe that the more choices that parents have with regard to education, it only increases the successful potential of our children to excel in their lives. So I am in full support of this bill, and I hope it receives support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Salazar. Any further questions? Senator Nethercott, to you. And then I see you, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Back in my home county of Fremont, my family was instrumental in starting and standing up a private parochial school, actually. Paid for by private dollars. And my family was proud to provide private scholarships for students who attended that school to pay the tuition. And that was privately funded. And it was intended to be affordable, because of course it was a nonprofit charitable organization for purposes of education. So it wasn't a for-profit entity. But what we are doing with this bill, in essence, is appropriating $30 million to those private parochial schools. Certainly, I believe in school choice. I think that's important. I believe in the rights of parents to determine how to educate their children. But I do think we need to be very cautious about government-funded private education, which is really, in essence, what this is doing. Now, the US Supreme Court has brought this issue into question concerning public dollars in those private institutions, particularly those that may discriminate or favor one of those protected classes like religion. the sponsor of this bill has provided testimony in committee about how this bill avoids or tries to maneuver around those constitutional concerns. And I will let the sponsor answer those questions regarding why the bill is constitutional for the use of such large state dollars. And that's one of the reasons why it was a no vote in Senate appropriations. Of a $30 million bill is a pretty significant expenditure, really to fund what also could be out-of-state private schools, really doing online schools in our state. And so these could be institutions in any other state but our own, where those dollars are being shipped out. Now, in fact, they might be educating students here locally online, because the requirement in the bill is that they be Wyoming students, of course. But I do think this is a huge policy question. I do support school choice. I do support those private schools. That doesn't mean it's the right decision for Wyoming state government right now, as we're discussing how we're going to fund education long-term.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. Senator Hutchings, you are actually up next, and then I see the other two. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On and for the bill, I don't really have a lot of statements. I think the bringer of the bill covered a lot of things or issues on the bill. One thing I would like to know is how many states have successfully done this? And that was pretty much it, the states.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Senator Pappas, and then Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly agree with all the sentiments my good colleague from Emery County shared with us. I'm a little concerned about the bill. I agree with scholarship programs. I think it's good to do this. But I have some concerns about this particular bill. Number one is we're diverting money already from the school foundation program, okay? And while we're kind of flush in dollars this year, I don't know how that's going to affect us in oncoming years. I'm assuming this is going to be a perpetual program. We're not going to just do it for a little bit and then quit. I'm assuming it's going to be continual. So that's one question. How, who are we robbing Peter to pay Paul? So that concerns me a little bit, because as we mentioned, we do have struggles with education funding. And second of all, while I agree that scholarships are good, if we're going to put dollars to education, I would actually like to see us, I've been a firm supporter of early education. I would like to see us put dollars in early education, more dollars than we do. Frankly, if it was up to me, the Hathaway Scholarship would all go to early education, and then our children wouldn't need the Hathaway Scholarship. They'd be all scholars before that. But it is what it is. My question is, do we want to put dollars here? I think dollars could be much better spent elsewhere. Early education for one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Senator Scott, and then Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, during the interim, the Joint Education Committee had a very interesting session, one of our meetings, on what could be constitutionally done in this area. And let me see if I can summarize that, because frankly, I learned a bunch there. It came out differently than I thought maybe it would. Mr. Chairman, first, the United States Supreme Court has weighed in this particular area. And there was a case in Maine. I think there was another similar case up in Montana. I think that was the second state. And what the Supreme Court said was, if you're going to use money through scholarships or directly or however you do it in your state, you cannot discriminate against religious schools. If you're going to allow scholarships to be used at any kind of private schools, you've got to make them available to religious schools. They're very clear on that. Then, Mr. Chairman, the discussion came to what does our Constitution allow? And this is where I got a surprise. I had always thought that, there's a constitutional prohibition, and that on the schools, saying that no appropriation can be made from said fund, and that language important, to any district for a year in which school not maintained, nor shall any portion of any public school fund ever be used to support or assist any private school or any school, academy, seminary, college, or other institution learning controlled by a church or sectarian organization or religious denomination whatsoever. What funds are they talking about? That was where you have to read that section of the Constitution very carefully. Speak to the funds that come from the land grant that we got, that wind, and the revenue from that winds up in the common school fund. It speaks the fines and forfeitures. They go into the common school fund of each county. It speaks to other laws of the state that provide funds for the schools, and I think that covers the constitutional taxation in section 15 that is dedicated to schools. It stops there. It's those funds that are prohibited from use. And when you start talking about other sources of funds the state has, it would appear that those can be used for this purpose. And it takes a careful reading of it, but that was the conclusion I drew after listening to the various contesting legal experts. And it was a fascinating conversation for anybody interested in the law. So it is my judgment that the approach being used here will probably be upheld by the courts. And you never know what the courts will come out with on an issue like this. I think they will uphold it, but we'll never know unless we try it. And we'll never know how it really works. If you want to compromise this, look to the size of the appropriation. Are we going too far to start? We want to try it with a smaller group, see how it works. It has been successful elsewhere, is my understanding. It is a matter of policy. Is it something we want to do? I have been a supporter of school choice, Mr. Chairman, because I think one of the ways to improve our existing public schools is to have some competition. This is a more vigorous way of competing than we've tried elsewhere, but it is in line with the desire to get some competition there. So, Mr. Chairman, I hope that is constructive in dealing with the constitutional issues and with the issue that's before us.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Let's go to Senator Anderson, and then I'll look back to Senator Steinmetz and see if she wants to rise.
Mr. Chairman, this is a pretty good idea, and I just saw it today, really, when Senator Steinmetz came to the committee. I have a feeling that it's too much money. $30 million in this budget. It seems to me like we've resisted a lot of things that are a lot less than that, so it's too much money for me. It's too big a bill. There's 33 pages to absorb here, and I'm fearful that the body is not absorbing all 33 pages. There's too much amending. There's 3 pages of amendments, and then the constitutional issue. I appreciate the maker and the good senator from Bates Creek telling us that it is constitutional, but I guess that's still to be decided. So there is some issues there. I haven't heard the Department of Education weigh in. Haven't heard a word from them. I didn't ask either. The treasurer testified today and was a little reluctant to take this on. He said it would take 9 employees for him to be able to do it. And, you know, I was kind of shocked at that, and that's why he was talking about a TPA. He would contract it out to the TPA, the third-party administrator, and he wouldn't have to do it. So it didn't sound like he was particularly interested in doing it. He said he didn't have room in his office to do it at all. And I don't know, I'm kind of curious why that wouldn't be the Department of Education anyway. So maybe it should be an interim subject so it can be vetted a little better by some committee and brought back next year with fewer changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Anderson. Senator Steinmetz, did you want to address a few questions? We've piled them up on you, and I'd like to give you an opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the good tall senator, the chairman of education, did a good job of addressing the constitutionality. Again, it's a question for this body, how much money you would like to put into this account and give it a try. The treasurer and the superintendent of public instruction have both been supportive of the bill and the concept. It takes a little work working with the treasurer's office. He's been on the phone with some other state treasurers who administer these programs, Mr. Chairman, and is feeling more and more comfortable all the time because they've given him a roadmap of how this might be accomplished. Back to the TPA, that takes a lot of the administration of this program off his plate. And I did get a text while we've been discussing this bill. Since the drafting of this bill, 2 other states have already passed ESA programs, so there are now 11. With that being said, lots of people are moving forward on this front, and we think it's a good direction for our state as well.
Thank you, Senator Steinmetz. Vice President Kinski?
I'd like to address some of those questions, and then I'd like to circle back to why I am in support of this. The first question about the homeschoolers, they didn't want to be included. I mean, I can't speak for them all. I know a number of them. They don't want anything to do with government, period. End of story. And the last time this bill came, it started to move forward and homeschoolers were included, and actually they weighed in, and I think that's what accounted for its defeat. This is not a church school bill. Will church schools be eligible? Sure. Is it constitutional? Absolutely. You heard the senator here. That prohibition in our Constitution was identical to the one in the state of Montana, which was struck down by the Supreme Court. It said if you give people a choice in this fashion, they can take their money where they want. And you can't prohibit them from taking it to a religious school. But that's not the intention of the bill. The intention of the bill is to give people a choice. Nationwide, there are over 73 different choice programs of various types and hues. Of this type, I believe there are 7 or 9 states that have adopted it successfully. That's why there are these TPAs, third-party administrators, who can handle this at such a low cost. The treasurer doesn't need to hire 9 employees. The bill allows this to be delegated to a third-party administrator that already has the software and the wherewithal and knows how to administer it. The treasurer just has to audit the program. The experience nationwide on private schools is that it ends up being less than 0.5% of overall K-12 expenditures. Not everybody wants to opt out, but there are enough who want to opt out. The reason I'm on the bill, besides the fact that I've been a fan of choice for so long, relates to the experience I had as mayor. When you get people coming into City Hall just spitting mad. And I tell my employees it's because that's their only avenue. They have no choice. The water system you have is the water system you have. The streets department you have is the streets department you have. You can't pick a different streets department or whatever they're dissatisfied with. They don't have the ability to call somebody else to fix the chuck holes. When there's a lack of choice, it leads to frustration and it leads to anger. That's what we're seeing in our school system today. If you noticed in the last round of races, I believe, if not in almost every school board race across the state, there was a slate of candidates who are mad. They're mad about masking. They're mad about holding their kids out of school. They're mad about DEI, CRT. They're mad about what books they're seeing in the children's library. They're mad about what the choice of books that their children are seeing. And they feel strongly that there are traditional values in America that are not being perpetuated through their child's education, and they want choice. Let them have it. Because otherwise, the anger that you're seeing is going to rip our school board elections apart. Because the people that are running, and many of them successfully in my county, have a real bone to pick with the educational system. I don't think it's healthy for a school board. Far better to say, here's your choice. Now, are they right? Does our school system not reinforce traditional values? It's not even necessary to answer that. They're customers who feel that way, and they want a choice. Give them the choice, resolve all those issues, take it away from every school board election. Get rid of the controversy. Those who want to opt out, let them opt out. I was fortunate also that when I was young, my parents felt that way. They had, however, the resources, the wherewithal that we could go to a private school. There are many, many people who are frustrated with the educational system who lack those resources. This is an easy way to give them that. The $30 million, I am willing to pay for good policy. I'm willing to pay for good policy. I'm even willing to backstop the public schools if they feel they're going to bleed and hemorrhage from this. I'm confident that won't happen. But I am willing to pay for good policy. This is good policy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kinski. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that there's anyone in this room or in the country that doesn't recognize that the people are angry. And so when we make decisions in a state of anger or emotion, that may not be what's most logical or understanding the consequences of that. You're just appealing to the emotion, right? And that feels good, right? We get that immediate gratification. Some of us in this room are very, very good at that. Others of us who take the longer view are less effective at that. But let's make this clear. Yes, the policy choice for you to consider and the constitutional question to consider is whether or not the state will start funding private schools. That's it. Regardless if they're religious or not. Because once you start funding private entities, you must fund them all. So you're thinking of the school that you may want to send your kid to. Now think of the school that you don't want to fund. Because you'll be funding that one too. The super liberal one, teaching kids about sex changes. The Wiccan one, right? Right, all of those, you're going to have to fund all of them. So once you open this door, it is open. Right now, we fund public education and we have control over public education, right? We can control those state dollars. If parents want to send their kids to private school, I support that. The question here is whether or not the government should. That's another issue. And then we have no control over those dollars. School choice is also a bit of a fantasy here because even in these communities, there's no private school to go to. So that's a reality of the situation. I certainly agree. Interesting questions here. Where's the Department of Education on this bill? Why are they not funding it? Why is this coming out of the treasurer's pocket? Why is the state treasurer in charge of our tens of billions of dollars in investments managing a K through 12 scholarship program? And what is this third-party administrator? Because I am very curious. Again, I heard this bill the first time today. It's very clear that this is a trend with a national lobbying organization that is sweeping the country. And guess what most are doing? Some are using their state treasurer in order to avoid this those constitutional concerns, because if education gets involved, it gets really tricky. But there's only about 3 to 4 third-party administrators in the state. I'd be curious to know what they're collecting in fees. Sounds like a super good gig from a private institution, further getting paid by this trend feeding on Americans' emotions and frustration with their school system. I'm not suggesting that's what this body is doing or what any of the sponsors who support this are even intending. It certainly crossed my mind as a skeptical, cynical lawyer looking for where those dollars can be made and who's really behind some of this effort. Who are those shareholders behind those third-party administrators? I have no idea, but I suspect they're really excited about these states and the tens of millions of dollars being funneled into this program that they will administer for us. A couple of questions I have outstanding, which is cost of overruns in other states. That data may not be available now because this is happening so rapidly that I don't know that there's been a serious amount of time to consider whether or not this is going to grow. I anticipate it will, because everyone will always need more, right? We know how hard it is to fund public education than when we start funding private education as well. What is the average scholarship tuition for these students to go? According to this calculation, it's about $6,000 a year, $30 million for 5,000 students. This is set to serve 5,000 students at $6,000 a year. Well, guess what? Inflation's underway. That tuition's going to go up. Are we going to need to increase that scholarship amount? It's for the children. How could we possibly say no? I just urge caution. I support school choice. Any suggestion to the contrary or expressing concern about the bill does not equate with not supporting school choice. That's a fallacy. That is not a fair argument to make.
Thank you, Senator Nethercott. All right, we've got a few more, and don't forget, we have a committee of the whole amendment at some point. I'm going to go to, I think I missed Senator Hutchings a moment ago. So Senator Hutchings, and then Senator Schuler, and then Senator Case.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman. Gave me a little bit of time to just rethink what I was going to say. I'm a taxpayer right now, and I don't have children in the school system, and I'm paying for a secular religious school at this moment. And I don't mind. It doesn't bother me at all. But there's been research by a big research firm that's pointed out that the public schools will actually benefit from ESAs. The nation's most established ESA program has actually benefited public schools by distributing funds back to remaining public school students, directing program savings to public schools, IT infrastructure, and helping to serve one of the most high-cost student populations in some states, all while decreasing taxpayer costs and safeguarding public funds. On and for the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hutchings, Senator Schuler, and then Senator Case, and then Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So much to think about on this, exactly what the good senator from Cheyenne said. Lots to think about. I think the first thing I'd like to say is, number one, I think I get the impression that there's a lot of folks in here that just don't think our educational system is really up to snuff. I think, again, apparently I don't know what scores anybody's looking at, but they're out there. You can kind of take a look and see how our kids are doing. The other thing I want to mention about public schools, we educate everybody, everybody's kid. The naughties and the good, and the top-notch kids, and the gifted and talented, everybody. And I'm all for choice as well. I have a brother who teaches in a charter school. I've had extended family members that have, a couple of them that have homeschooled. I mean, I had one nephew that also did an online school. I think all of us want choice. Choice is good. Competitiveness is good. It makes us all better. It makes public schools better. But I do think, and I respectfully disagree with our senior senator, but I think if you go back and you look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 19, and Article 7, Section 8, I don't see how you can possibly think that these would be okay to use for private schools, particularly schools of church-type backgrounds. And so I just don't think our Constitution will allow it. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but the bottom line is, I think we're doing a great job in all of these areas, whether it's online, whether it's homeschool, whether it's, I mean, every parent has to make that choice. But I have a real problem with public school funds being used to fund private schools, particularly, church schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schuler. Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm thinking of all the times we sat in this floor and we have tried to be prescriptive about what's taught in a public school. This year, we had a testing requirement about government and the Constitution. In years past, we've set the curriculum. We've talked about things, everything from sports to looked at what level of math we attain, what's required for the Hathaway, how many years of this, how many years of that. We really care about what's taught in the public schools. And Mr. Chairman, I wonder, are we going to care what's taught in the private schools? And so, are we or not? So I happen to be a person that thinks, well, the earth is warming up. I don't think that mankind existed with the dinosaurs. I don't think they rode them around or whatever, like you see in those posters. I don't think the earth is 6,000 years old, Mr. Chairman. I do think the Constitution is more than the words in this book because of the interpretation of the Supreme Court. Those are my opinions about education and how I might feel if schools were teaching things like that. I believe in parents. I believe in parents using their own money if they want to teach kids that dinosaurs and man were coexisted. Everything started 6,000 years ago. It's all done. And all the geology and all the oceans and all the deposits were since that time, fine. But if we're going to sit in here and say about the government and the Constitution and require our public schools to prescribe what's in their libraries, what they teach in government, on and on and on, we are the super school board? Are we just going to look the other way at the funding to go to private schools and say, no matter what happens, whatever the standards, whatever the belief about religion and creation, and I'm religious. I just don't believe the 6,000-year part. Mr. Chairman, that's my conundrum. We were kind of two-faced about this. Man, we can prescribe our local school boards up and down who are duly elected to represent their communities, and we're going to surrender to money to something not elected, totally free choice. I'm okay. Private money, private choice is fine. But we shouldn't be doing that with public funds, Mr. Chairman. And that's the conundrum, because you can't treat one side one way and the other side the other way. And I hope you can help me with that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Case. Senator Pappas, and then let's try and get to that Committee of the Whole amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great debate. I appreciate everyone's thoughts. Besides the 2 points I made earlier, the one about who are we robbing we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, because I do think it's coming out of public education. It's coming to the school foundation account, and certainly I also think that I don't disparage scholarships. I think they're great things, but again, what I said earlier, I think our dollars are better in early education. But there's one other fact that I just wanted to point out to you that no one spoke about yet, is we are growing government just a little bit more. We're creating another commission here, okay? So, while it's not much, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but just wanted to bring to everybody's attention, we're creating another 7-member commission that's going to be involved in this entire administration of this program. And so, again, I'm not here to tell you yay or nay, vote it up, vote it down, whatever you believe. But just be mindful what we're doing, because we are, even so slightly, we're growing government again.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. All right, let's read in that Committee of the Whole amendment.
Senate File 143, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 10, after.
Thank you, Senator Brennan. Let's move that and let's hear about it.
Thank you. I move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 143 and ask for your favorable consideration. What this amendment would do is on page 1, line 10, after amendments, we would insert authorizing a temporary committee as specified. I'll explain that a little bit here in a minute. On page 23, line 7, we would delete 1 year and insert 4 years. On this part, there is a board that's set up for the treasurer, and we felt that 1 year term was kind of short, so we'd like to make that 4-year term. Page 32, line A, after section 4A, insert just cleaning up some language there. And then after page 30, on page 32, after line 32, we would insert the state treasurer may establish and appoint a temporary committee of up to 5 members for the purpose of advising and assisting with the promulgation of rule under subsection A of this section. The members of the committee shall serve without compensation, and the committee, if formed, shall dissolve no later than January 1, 2025. This was put in at the request of the treasurer so that he could have a temporary committee before the committee is set up. So I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Brennan. Any questions on Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1? Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Brennan's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 143, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 143 has been adopted. We are back on Senate File 143, Wyoming Freedom Scholarships Act 2. Any further discussion before the question is called? Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and in support of this, you know, I hear, oh, we shouldn't be using public funds. These funds are also the funds of the people that may elect to have their children in this program. It's their money too, you know. So I don't see the rub there. I mean, $30 million, these people, if all 5,000 people apply for this, or 5,000 students, you know, that 30 million, I just don't get it. I mean, it's their money too. It's a big pool of money, everybody in the state, and let's not forget these are Wyoming children that are being educated. And at a price of $6,000, that's a pretty good bargain, because I think in the public schools, it's $18,000 a year. So on for it.
Thank you, Senator French. Any other thoughts? Seeing none, question has been called. All those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a due pass recommendation on Senate File 143, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Senate File 143 has passed the Committee of the Whole, and with that, we're going to stand at ease until the sound of the gavel for 5 minutes to stretch our legs. Senate, let's get ready to roll. All right, the Committee of Whole will return to order. Next bill for your consideration is Senate File 152. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History, sponsored by Senator Pappas, an act relating to criminal history records. It was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 152, Occupational Therapist Criminal History. For an explanation of the bill, I turn you to Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill came to me by way of the State Board of Occupational Therapists and Occupational Therapy. If you recall, we passed a bill last session that allowed for an interstate compact to practice occupational therapy. And in that compact, the requirement for practicing under the compact is a criminal background check. And we did have that language in the bill that we passed. The issue, however, is when the state has requested, when the board has requested a background history from the FBI has pushed back giving us the background history. And they cite a public law 92-544. It gives 6 items that they require from the states that are requesting a background check. And one of those items says, must identify the specific category applicant licenses falling within the purview, thereby avoiding overbreadth. And in our statute last time, the language said all persons applying for compact privileges. And so we got language from DCI that we believe will correct this issue and allow the FBI to release the information. So all we're doing here is we're removing the word persons, you'll see it on page 2, and inserting currently licensed occupational therapists and occupational therapist assistants. So we believe that now we are providing the specific category and alleviating the overbreadth that the FBI believes we had when we just said persons. So DCI thinks this will work. And again, there's many states that have run into this, and frankly, there is actually a push, and there is a House bill in Congress to actually require the FBI to do this. But we're not going to wait for the feds. We're going to just go ahead and pass this and make it clean up our statute to allow them to provide the criminal background checks.
Thank you, Senator Pappas.
Stand for questions.
Any questions for Senator Pappas? Any questions on Senate File 152? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 152, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 152 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 101. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act Amendments, sponsored by Senator Ide, an act relating to the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, was referred to Committee Number 3, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Beitman, French, Ide, and McEwen. No, Senator Pappas. Senator Beitman, acting chair.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure, Senator Beitman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, it do so with a due pass recommendation of Senate File 101. And to present the bill, I'll call on the bill sponsor, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Senator Beitman. Senator Ide, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senate File 101 is built upon the Wyoming Legal Tender Act that we passed in 2018. Gives the state treasurer authority, this new bill, to invest in specie legal tender. And for those of you that are not familiar with those terms, I think most of you probably were in this body at the time, but that's what the original bill, the Wyoming Legal Tender Act, back in 2018, essentially what that bill did was, the bill was to not tax money effectively, legal tender, and that bill defined legal tender. And I'll just kind of go through that first here so everybody's kind of familiar with what this amendment does. So the bill defined legal tender and, just recognized that it is a means of a medium of exchange. And then it defined specie. And the long and short of specie is just coin having gold and silver content. And then specie legal tender was defined. And, that was essentially specie legal tender is our US minted coins, gold and silver, and foreign minted gold and silver coins. So essentially what we're doing here with this amendment is the main point of SF 101 is to prompt the state to get up to speed on how to deal in constitutional money, including holding gold as an asset to help the state hedge against its high exposure to Federal Reserve note dollars, whose value has been plummeting, as we all talk about in here about inflation. It's a big conversation worldwide. The State Treasurer's Office, working with outside experts such as Precious Metals Depository, would establish a mechanism for the Department of Revenue so that it's capable of receiving mineral tax payments denominated in specie, there again, gold and silver. These outside service providers are experts in receiving, authenticating, exchanging, and storing gold and silver. If at a later time the state wishes to handle more of the responsibilities directly rather than overseeing them, it could do so. However, at the onset, it's simply more efficient to enlist outside experts and service providers, and SF 101 enables the state to do that. Because precious metals are priced in the volatile dollar, its price denominated in Americans' unbacked currency will vary. As a general trend, gold will tend to rise in nominal value because of the value of the dollar is being eroded over time. There's an old saying that an ounce of gold can buy a decent suit. When gold was $20 an ounce 100 years ago, that would buy a nice suit. Today, at nearly $2,000 an ounce, gold will still buy you a nice suit, probably a shirt and maybe a pair of shoes as well. The state has a large amount of unhedged exposure to the dollar and dollar-denominated debt. Since legislation was first proposed in 2019 to ensure the state of Wyoming to hold gold, that was a bill that was kind of ran through here back in 2019 to get the state to invest, sort of like this one is. Gold has risen since then about 50% since 2019. That bill did not pass, and the state still owns no physical gold or silver. Inflation appeared at the time low. but it has accelerated ever since. And now it's an obvious problem. The state remains highly exposed to the ongoing trend of currency debasement. Holding physical gold is a hedge against inflation and financial turmoil, and SF 101 provides the state with the tools to get smarter when it comes to gold and silver. There's an old John Adams quote that I'd like to throw in there as far as the ravages of inflation, and he said that there's two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by the sword, and the other is by debt. Lastly, by tasking the state treasurer to install the plumbing for holding and dealing in sound, honest, and constitutional money, Wyoming can get out in front of today's ongoing monetary problems before they expand into full-blown crisis. It's our duty to take some initial steps in this direction so that our state is more resilient and prepared. That's why I hope you will pass 101 today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Thank you,
there is
Senator.
an amendment to this as
Do you want to do that right now, or do you want to take questions first?
We can go ahead and introduce that amendment right now.
All right, let's have it read in.
Okay.
No, Senator Ide, one moment. Go ahead.
Senate File 101, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 2B4.
All right, Senator Ide, let's move that amendment.
Okay. I move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to SF 101. Ask for your favorable consideration.
Great, go ahead and walk through it then if you're raising it now, please.
Yeah, essentially, in our committee, there was a lot of questions brought up regarding the localities accepting gold and silver as payment and taxes and debt. And it looked pretty cumbersome, and we recognized that. And so talking to, the Department of Revenue and some of the other speakers there, and within our committee, we decided to, take just narrow it down to the department of what they collect directly. And all of that is mineral taxes. And so there's really only two, that's the only change that we made to this bill, or to this Legal Tender Act. And really all it did is on page 1, line 2, before taxes, just insert mineral. And then on page 2, line 10, delete state and local taxes and insert mine products severance taxes imposed by Title 39, Chapter 14 of the Wyoming statutes. Those are the only amendments.
Great, thank you, Senator Ide. Any questions or discussion on the Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1? Questions on Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Ide's motion to adopt Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 101 say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill, Senate File 101. Any discussion? Any questions? Senator Kolb.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the bringer of the bill to walk through what would happen if I don't know, had a supposed bar of gold and I came in to pay my taxes, I suppose, or how would that exactly physically work? And where will be Wyoming's Fort Knox? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. You can buy a suit with it. Senator Guru and then Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question. Oh, look here. Page 1, line 7, I believe, and it says, or maybe I may be on the wrong line, but the quote here, it requires the treasurer to hold and invest the specie. And I'm just wondering how that, just a little discussion on how that works, that we're requiring him to invest in that, and when should he, I mean, that's kind of, right now, constitutionally, that's, especially if you ask him, he's, that's his call, and the state investment board. So I'm just trying to get a little handle on how that works. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Guru. Senator Hutchings, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and for the bill, if we can vote for invisible tokens, I believe we can vote for tangible gold and silver. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchings, I'm still looking for that vote from you on the invisible token, and I'm looking for it later today. We'll go to Senator Pappas. I enjoyed that too, everyone. Senator Pappas, and then maybe back to Senator Ide for some responses. Senator Pappas.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was on the committee, I was the no vote on the committee, and this amendment makes it a lot more palatable. Certainly with local taxes, state and local taxes, we have many entities around the state that collect taxes, local governments, and if somebody walks in with some gold nuggets that they just dug out of their backyard or wherever, it is difficult on our taxing authorities to take it. Number one, there's an issue with counterfeit. How do you know it's pure gold and the whole 9 yards? And there is technology out there that'll do that. So we heard that in committee. And then what do they do with it? Because taxing authorities don't hold money. They bring in the money and then it gets distributed back out. That was testimony. And so but you can't do that with gold. You take in gold and then now what do you do with it? I can't distribute it to whoever, to the other entities that you're distributing tax money to. And as it was mentioned, the closest place where we can store money is in Idaho, I believe, is where they told us. And so somebody would have to come with an armored truck and would have to exchange the gold for actual dollars. So, and in my mind, I don't think anybody would go to that trouble. They would just give you dollars for the tax. But with this, and then we're talking minerals only, maybe the gold mine that we're contemplating here in Laramie County, maybe they'll pay their severance taxes in gold. That might be a good thing. But the treasurer would have to be able to take gold. And I don't think the treasurer had an issue with it. I think in committee, he wasn't opposed to it. I don't know that he was, raving about it, but he would have to figure out some process of taking the gold, making sure that it was not a counterfeit product, watered down with lead or whatever. And then he would have to figure out how he's going to hold it until it gets sent to somewhere else and then exchange that for money so that we can invest it or whatever we do with our mineral royalty or the severance taxes we take in. So again, I think it's a bill that's, we're looking for a problem for this solution, so I don't think we have a problem out there. I understand the bringer's intent that someday our currency may not be good and we may need gold. Because who knows what the dollar will be like if they keep printing them. But I just don't think it's really workable for us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. All right. We'll go one more with Senator Landon and then back to you, Senator Ide.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I want to commend the sponsor of the bill. I thought he did a great job of walking us through. I just had this feeling, and still have it, that it feels like this bill will have more impact than I'm able to discern. I called up the fiscal note, and even the fiscal note says, well, we just aren't sure, until we get a request for proposal. I know that these fiscal notes are done well in advance of the session, and I just wondered if there was any more conversation about this fiscal impact that might help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. All right, Senator Ide, you've got a stack of 4 or 5 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good questions. I'll hit the easiest one first here. Good senator from Teton County. You hit on something that we discussed when I talked to the lawyers back there. We were looking at that too, as far as changing that language, and they recommended leaving it in there because it ties right back into the original Legal Tender Act in 2018. And we can maybe have that discussion more after today, and I'll look into that a little bit more. So that's one of them. To go to the good senator from Sweetwater County, he was the first one. to try to answer that question, you know, right now, if the treasurer did start buying physical gold and silver, it would have to be outsourced. We don't have a state depository for precious metals in this state. Texas is kind of the first one that was doing something like that. They had like $1 billion in their University of Texas account that they had the physical gold, and they had it stored in JP Morgan's vault in New York City, and they wanted to get it out of there and into their home state. So, you know, I don't know if that answers your questions, but I think that we would have to outsource the storage of that, but it's relatively cheap. I mean, you can have $100 million of gold really doesn't take up a whole lot of space, actually. I mean, I think they say that the size of a 30-foot or a cube the size of a football field, 30 meters high, is all of the gold that's been mined in the world since the beginning of mining of gold. So it's a lot of value in a small area. Let's see, to go to the good colleague from Natrona County. Trying to remember what that question was here. Let's see. Oh, I think you were asking, are we ready for this, or what's?
It was updated fiscal note, actually.
Oh,
Senator
yeah,
Ide,
yeah, exactly. I think I've talked at length with the treasurer about this as well. He's on board with this. He's a little bit of a gold bug himself, I think, and looking to protect our state from inflation, and there's tools to do that, and this is probably the #1 tool to do that with. A lot of the central banks around the world, they're the ones that own most of the gold. Russia, China, they've been accumulating gold for recently, a lot of gold, just because of what's going on with all of the funny money getting printed around the world. So anyway, yeah, the fiscal note, it does mention on there too that the Department of Revenue is used to seeing different things come in, foreign currency, coin. So, if we had to deal with precious metals coming into, we would have something set up to have an exchange rate and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's about the best I can do on that one.
Thank you, Senator Ide.
Yeah. Let's see.
And was that everything? Shall we take more? Ready for some more? All right, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll try to be more specific. First, I like the idea. However, you bring in your gold bullion, who knows what it is. You then hand it over to pay something. You have to have some kind of, loan temporarily until the gold is assayed. And then when the price changes, because the market's constantly fluctuating, what is the value worth? When do you set that point? At the point you brought it in, or at the point it's actually assayed and evaluated in market? So how would that work? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kolb. Let's stack up a few more if there are any before we go back to Senator Ide. Any further questions? Seeing none, Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a legitimate question. Good senator from Sweetwater County. There is some language in here. Let's see here, bottom of page 2, line 22, it says, as used in this paragraph, real-time basis, or quote, real-time basis means as close as possible to the actual time the exchange information is available so that the information is provided practically immediately. So, it probably will be early, getting early baby steps on this thing, trying to figure out how to get something in place, like anything that we do here or outside of here. Once you get it started, you start learning a little bit more of the formula that works best. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ide. Senator Pappas.
Thank you. And just to add on to what Senator Ide said, in testimony, we did hear that the treasurer does have software, a subscription, I recall, that we pay for that will give us that immediate moment-to-moment price of gold. So that is not a problem. That's not a problem. The point of when you actually, I guess, figure out the price is at the point of when it's turned over to you. However, there's there's a difference in prices. There's a buy and a sell price. And so the price would necessarily be higher at that point so that we can cover the time span that it may take to figure out the true price. So there is some overhead there that we will pay for, just so that we don't lose our shirts.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Majority Floor Leader Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, I think the answer to my colleague from Sweetwater County's question can be found on page 3, line 20. That just says the state treasurer shall adopt rules necessarily to implement this section. I'm sure they'll contemplate time for assay and the value at that point in time, but that's where they would do that.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Any further discussion on Senate File 101, Wyoming Legal Tender Act amendments? Any further discussion? Seeing none, question's been called. All those in favor of Senator Beitman's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 101, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 101 has passed the Committee of the Whole. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 132. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Program, sponsored by Senator Ellis, an act relating to education, was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, Scott, and Steinmetz. Senator Scott, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Excuse, Senator Guru. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senator Scott?
Mr. Chairman, I move in the Committee of the Whole rise and report it do so with the recommendation that Senate File 132 do pass. I believe there was a standing committee amendment. If so, I'd ask to be read in at this time.
Senate File 132, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 3, after line 12, insert.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I move adoption of the Standing Committee Amendment, and to explain both the bill and the Standing Committee Amendment, I yield to Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Ellis, and if you prefer to defer the Appropriations Committee amendment to them, feel free. If you want to work it in as you go, feel free.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will present the bill and then discuss the Standing Committee amendment after I get done explaining it. Before we jump into the meat, colleagues, just want to give you some context of where this came from. And this is a bill I've been thinking about for years. But essentially, if you look in our statutes at 21-9-101B1, you will see a number of subjects listed. They include reading and language arts, social studies, mathematics, science, fine arts and performing arts, physical education, health and safety, humanities, career vocational education, world languages, government and civics, including state and federal constitutions, and computer science. So a number of years ago, we referred to these items as the basket of goods. In addition to that, we have also identified a number of skills we want our students to have: problem solving, interpersonal communications, computational thinking, critical thinking, creativity, and life skills, including personal financial management skills. Those are what we call our common core of skills. So a few years ago, our legislature added computer science to the mix. And at the time, we heard a lot of testimony that there just wasn't time in the day to add this, in particular for elementary school kids, our kindergartners and first graders. And so in meeting with the State Board of Education's liaison at the time, he said something that really stuck with me. Essentially said, you know, years ago, the state board adopted really rigorous math standards. And because there's so much emphasis on math, we really can't add anything else in. And so as a legislator, I thought, wouldn't it be helpful if we were given that information? You know, if we knew that adding computer science meant maybe reducing some of the rigor of the math standards, not removing math, but just looking at the standards themselves, then at least we'd have something to work off of. But the way that our content and performance are structured, they're all done in silos, so by subject area. So when you're looking at what a kindergartner is expected to learn in a given year or a given day, we really don't have that information. So the goal of this, Mr. Chairman, would be to better synthesize all of these subjects and all of these requirements. How do we maybe have some instruction that touches on both math and science, or reading and science? We have requirements in our statutes right now that say K through 2 foreign language should be taught. But if you read the standards, they're really written as though those classes were being taught at a 7th or 8th grade level. So the idea, Mr. Chairman, would be how do we, put this information together better? And as I've been looking at this and thinking about this for several years, there have been important developments. First of all, our State Board of Education has been developing something called a profile of a graduate, trying to understand what we want our high school seniors to be able to graduate with. And once they complete that work, this would fit nicely into those efforts to see how we build on those skills and hopefully make for a more efficient day, ease the burden for our K through 12 students, and then also provide better resources and flexibility for teachers. So in looking at this bill, that's what this seeks to do. You'll find on page 1, it would add a duty to the State Board of Education, going on to page 2, that they would start publishing their content and performance standards based on content areas by grade level rather than just by content areas. The remainder of the bill would require the state superintendent of public instruction to engage with a study. And so here you'll see paragraph A starts laying out the foundation of who would be involved with that study, seeking input from stakeholders. But Romanet 1 on line 19 on page 2, it would be to examine what the common core of knowledge and skills are to ensure that all students are provided with the opportunity to acquire those skills and knowledge. And then going on to page 2, Romanet 2, you'll see consideration of the elimination, addition, and modification of the common core of knowledge and skills contained in 21.9.101B. I'd add, if you look at this list, it's a little confusing when we add things to it. For example, we have government and civics, which we discussed a lot in a prior bill about our knowledge of constitutions. Well, this is not a standalone class. This is actually contained within the social studies standards. There are no standards written for humanities. So it's about time we really start understanding when we put things in the basket, what our expectation is. Is this something we want our students having everyday exposure and lessons to? Or are there things like PE and art that we really consider electives? So going on back to the bill, this amendment, and this is where I'll describe this, and I know it's been moved. So this looks like a big amendment, but essentially we received some feedback from the Department of Education saying that maybe the number of items we've asked them to study was a little too much. So this would clarify on page 3, line 13. It would insert a new paragraph that would basically make everything above it mandatory to be included in the study and everything below it permissibly studied. We left that language in there so that the people working on this would have some context of where we eventually want to go. So although this looks like a huge amendment, it really isn't. It would just make the rest of the numbered items permissive items to study. So you'll see a lot of renumbering. And then additionally, we also received some feedback that the initial date that we'd have this report due of August 1st, 2023 might be too aggressive. So the department requested that we change that to November 1st. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the standing committee amendment, but would urge your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. We are on the standing committee amendment. Any questions, any discussions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Scott's motion to adopt standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 132, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Standing committee amendment number 1 to Senate File 132 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to continue on, the bill's pretty self-explanatory. It's a study bill, so I'm not going to walk through all of this in great detail. But as we've talked about education, the importance of it, our recalibration process, really honing in on what we want our students to learn, I think that this really starts getting after some of the issues that we've been talking about for years. So would urge your aye vote. I think this is the right time to be doing this.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any discussion? Senator Scott, to you.
Mr. Chairman, on and for the bill, let me make a couple of points here. One, we have a new state superintendent individual in whom I have a great deal of confidence. I'm really excited. I think the voters chose very wisely. And this is an appropriate time to have a fresh look at what we're doing in education. Fresh point of views come in, and I think the timing is right on this bill, Mr. Chairman. Second, I do have some considerable concerns in the area of one of the focuses of this bill. We've got a massive set of standards on what we expect the kids to learn. And I have a couple of concerns, Mr. Chairman, that I think this bill will deal with. I'm afraid that they have set a standard on everything they can find, and the standards do give a certain priority, except, Mr. Chairman, there's so many of them that you make everything a priority, then nothing is a priority. And I think we may have a problem there, and that's one of the things I hope this study will get at. It seems to me we need a system where there's some very broad, very deep standards in terms of teaching some of the basic skills, reading and mathematics and whatnot, in the early grades, things like that. And then a smattering of, these are things that are really sort of secondary. You don't have to know them all, but you need to know some of them to get some feeling of what you can do with the basics that you've learned. I think that's a set of issues that this will be able to delve in. What's an appropriate standard? Do they all need to be equal? How do we handle that sort of thing? And I think it has the potential, Mr. Chairman, to give us a much better handle on what we're doing in education and what's working, what isn't, why isn't it working? So, Mr. Chairman, for all those reasons, I commend this study to the Senate.
Thank you, Senator Scott. We're on Senate File 132, Study of K-12 Education Programs. Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I want to commend the sponsor of the bill. Certainly support it, think it's a good idea. I just wonder and would appreciate any thoughts the sponsor has with regard to the makeup of who's going to be providing us with this information. We've been holding at arm's length, you know, a lot of those professionals these days. And my concern is the handoff of that information and what sort of filters it might go through and how it would get here, and how can the Senate really find out about what we find out. I mean, these are professionals bringing us the best of their information, and I just want to make sure that it gets where it needs to get to. Hope that makes sense, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Any further discussion on Senate File 132? Back to you, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you look at page 2, the state superintendent would do this study in consultation with the State Board of Education, local school districts, and I'm sure any other stakeholders. I've really rejected the notion that we need to define who exactly sits on the task force. I kind of want to get away from this practice of it has to be an appointee from the Senate, an appointee from the House, 2 from the governor. I mean, I'm just kind of tired of that. And not that that's not necessary in other areas, but I trust in visiting with the superintendent that she's going to consult with a lot of stakeholders. And then along those lines, there is an appropriation. In visiting with the department, I think that they will need to hire a consultant to kind of start looking at best practices in other states. I'm not aware of other states who tackle their content and performance standards in this way. So I think a lot of this is going to be kind of research-based. So it's a fluid thing, but that's how I decided to structure the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any further questions on Senate File 132? Senator Dockstader in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You may have mentioned it, but how does it all fit in with this, I believe we call it the RIDE program? Does it tie in with any of that?
Any further questions for the sponsor before she rises? Seeing none, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is not something that is explicitly contained in the RIDE recommendations. I'd say it's more a little bit in line with what the State Board has been working on with their Profile of Graduate, which is part of the RIDE initiative to some degree. The Profile of the Graduate really recognizes that in our content and performance standards, we don't have that outline perfectly of what we expect our high schools to be delivering when they're graduating students. So the State Board a few years ago started reaching out to stakeholders. They actually have a group, with those designated individuals, and they've been doing a tremendous amount of work. So I think this is in line with a lot of their thinking. This is definitely a stronger nudge to start filling in the pieces. The Profile of the Graduate kind of starts with the end and then works backward of how you get there. So this is a little bit of a way to kind of bridge some of that to see how we fill in from that, first moment in kindergarten to your final graduation. So I think it fits, I think it'll fit fine.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. Any further questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Scott's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 132, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 132 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 120. Will the reading clerk please read the Senate file?
Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights, sponsored by Senator Barlow, an act relating to crimes and criminal procedure, was referred to Committee Number 1, which returned to committee restoration recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Cooper, Furphy, Landon, and Schuler. Excused Senator Case. Senator Landon, Chairman. Was re-referred to Committee Number 2, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes Senators Anderson, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Excused Senator Garou. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the Senate file. What is your pleasure? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights. There is a standing committee amendment. I'd ask that that be read in at this time.
Senate File 120, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 3, delete.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the amendment and ask that you call on Senator Barlow for an explanation of this fine bill.
Thank you, Senator Landon. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the body. I bring you Senate File 120, Restoration of Civil Rights. And as the good chairman of Judiciary noted, there is a standing committee amendment. The standing committee amendment does two things. One, it eliminates half of the bill. So if we like expediency in our debate, hopefully that'll assist. And the half of the bill that it removes has to do with domestic violence. This bill is a policy that the state of Wyoming started about 7 years ago, about restoring rights to one-time nonviolent felons. And what they receive now is their voting rights back at the completion of their sentence. Now, subsequent, if they have a second crime or another debilitating or incompetency, then they lose those forever, and they would not be eligible for these. So this builds upon someone's ability to have their voting rights and actually having their voting rights returned to them. And then after a certain period of time, they would get their civil rights, which the remainder of their civil rights, by the definition of this bill, is their rights to serve on a jury, their right to hold public office, and their Second Amendment rights. Bear firearms, knowingly use and possess firearms. So, Mr. Chairman, as I said, this bill originally started off and was my best effort to try to understand the complexities around domestic violence and the federal prohibition against owning or having possession of firearms around domestic violence. And it turned out to be too heavy of a lift, even as much effort as several of you tried to assist me with, our staff tried to assist with me, and other research and other folks in other communities tried to assist me with. So I think it was a suggestion of mine to the committee, and the committee, after hearing testimony and taking this bill up on one day and then continuing on a second day, felt like the domestic violence portion of this bill should be removed. So, Mr. Chairman, that is a standing committee amendment, lines 1 through 26. The second part of the standing committee amendment is when this bill tasks the same agency that's responsible for restoring voting rights with the restoration of the remainder of an individual's rights. And that is that department that's responsible for incarceration. And that agency talked about the interest they had after the 2017 legislation passed. And since that time, I can report that 3,400 Wyoming citizens have had their voting rights restored. So if you take that 3,400 and then you give them the potential opportunity based on them not having lost their rights in another way, and others who have not maybe taken the effort to go have their voting rights restored, which we would in healthcare call the woodwork effect. They say, oh, wait, I want to be a part of this now. The department felt very strongly that they would need some staffing, at least in the short term, to accomplish the mission or the goal of this policy decision that we have before us. So what you'll see in your amendment, standing committee amendment, is an appropriation for one at-will employee. This will not continue in their budget for the remainder, from the effective date of this bill until the end of the biennium. So, Mr. Chairman, I think probably if it might be wisest to dispense with the standing committee amendment regarding the appropriation and the removal of the domestic violence restoration component from that, and then I'll walk you through the bill in itself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Are there any questions or is there any discussion on Standing Committee Amendment number 1? Seeing none, all those in favor of Senator Landon's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 120, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Standing Committee Amendment number 1 has been adopted. We're back on the bill. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So very quickly, good colleagues, as I walk through this bill, you will see violent felonies are prohibited from participating in this restoration of rights. That is the same way we approach our restoration of voting rights. They are not eligible. There is one adjustment, and I draw your attention to page 2, line 13. And you'll see on page 2, line 13, a violation of Wyoming Statute 65204B. That is bodily injury of a peace officer while they're on duty. So that is, I'm adding that, and this bill proposes to add that as a violent felony. And the reason why is because it's right below. If they are, if you've pled guilty to a previous felony, violent felony, or a felony under this, you lose your firearm rights immediately. So it seemed to be most consistent not to have this disparity within our statutes when it came to restoration, when it comes to restoration. So this does create a little bit more work for the department to ferret this out, but it seemed like consistency is what we'd like to have in our policy, and that's what I try to attempt here. The next page, Mr. Chairman, you will note that all of lines 6 through 14 are stricken because that has to do with domestic violence. The bottom of the page, Mr. Chairman, the way that currently works now is, and you're convicted in the state of Wyoming of any felony, and this is the lines 19 through 22 on page 3, you lose your right to be an elector, to be a juror, to hold office in the state. But right now, it's the federal government that actually restricts our Second Amendment rights. However, to restore our rights, it seems most expedient to actually do that ourselves, so then we have a clear path to restore them. You cannot expunge or do several other things and restore your rights because we're not restoring them completely. And that's exactly what the appellate courts that are responsible for the state of Wyoming have said. It's all or nothing when it comes to that. So, Mr. Chairman, I chose to say, let's do everything we can to restore someone's rights. Next page, Mr. Chairman, all that language was removed because that's been taken out of the bill in the DV. Now we're on page 5. Page 5 of the bill, ladies and gentlemen, is the heart of the bill. And what it says is, after you have had your voting rights restored, which is currently in current statute, is upon completion of your sentence, probation, parole, and a period of time, this gets to recidivism, a period of time equal to the length of your sentence or 5 years has passed, the remainder of your rights are automatically restored. So that is the guts of the bill as far as how the mechanism and the application of the restoration. There is no second chance. I want to say that again. There is no second chance. That is the same way we have in our current voting rights restoration. And because this is built on that, lose them a second time, there is no second chance. That continues on to page 6, Mr. Chairman. The bottom of page 6, 14 through the remainder, almost all of page 7 is stricken because that is the domestic violence component. Bottom of page 7, this will be renumbered because of where we are. And what we're doing here is we're notifying those folks about the rights, the restoration of the rights for these people. Obviously, we want to notify that agency of the federal government that would be interested in restoration rights. And then we're also notifying on page 8 our Secretary of State, because that would have to do with juror voting and other things. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the bill, and I would certainly stand for any questions and ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Any discussion on Senate File 120, restoration of civil rights? Questions, discussion, Senator Hutchings.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I was kind of double-minded during his presentation. And if I look on the amendment, pages 6, line 14 through 22, you're deleting that. 6, 5, let me see, 6, 2, I believe it is, 5, 10, Romanet 2 will not be included as an exclusion. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman, if I have that right? Senator Barlow?
Thank you, Senator Hutchings. Any further questions for the sponsor before the sponsor rises? Seeing none, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I believe 62510 is a misdemeanor domestic violence, and that is completely removed from the bill. So this will have no impact on misdemeanor domestic violence, which domestic violence is an umbrella that includes domestic assault, domestic battery, and several other crimes under federal law. So no, this will no longer be included in the bill. We're in this policy discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barlow. Further questions? Further questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senator Landon's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 120, restoration of civil rights, please say aye. Those opposed, no. Senate File 120 has passed the Committee of the Whole. The next bill for our... Yes, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
I move the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor, please enthusiastically say aye. Opposed, no. That motion has carried, Mr. President.
Reading clerk will read the Committee of the Whole report.
Mr. President, your Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate File 169, do pass amended. Senate File 127, do pass amended. Senate File 129, do pass. Senate File 43, do pass amended. Senate File 154, do pass amended. Senate File 167, do pass amended. Senate File 155, do pass. Senate File 173, do pass amended. Senate File 176, do pass. Senate File 139, do pass. Senate File 111, do pass. Senate File 143, do pass amended. Senate File 152, do pass. Senate File 101, do pass amended. Senate File 132, do pass amended. Senate File 120, do pass amended. Senator Rothfuss, Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. President, I move for the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion carried. The report's been adopted. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
I guess they don't want to go, Mr. President. They'd like to clap. Mr. President, I move that we stand adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, February 1st, folks.
Senator Scott, are there any announcements?
Mr. Chairman, how time goes by when we're having fun. Mr. Chairman, your Committee Number 4, Education, will meet tomorrow morning, 7:30 a.m., State Capitol Room, W110. Consider the following bills. Senate File 50, Charter School Amendments. Senate File 52, School Finance, Special Education Funding. We have on the list Senate File 168, Alternative Teaching Certificate, and at the request of the sponsor, we'll lay that bill back till Friday. Senate File 175, Hazing, and Senate File 177, promoting obscenity, educational exception, repeal. And the note is, if time's insufficient, the bills will be carried over to the Friday meeting.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 9, Minerals, will meet Wednesday, February 1st upon noon recess. Here are the following bills. House Bill 61, engrossed source material associated with mining agreement. House Bill 50, solid waste cease and transfer program funding. And House Bill 69, engrossed coal-fired facility closures litigation.
Thank you, Senator Dockstader. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow morning in room 6 and online to have a caffeine-fueled discussion on Senate File 115, Wyoming Prescription Drug Transparency Act. We'll be not taking any testimony. That will simply finish working the bill. Senate File 162, Grace Smith Medical Freedom Act, and Senate Joint Resolution 10, Right of Healthcare Access.
We can see through that. Senator Landon.
Mr. President, thank you. Your Judiciary Committee 1 will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in room W4 downstairs to take up 2 bills that I hope to get up and out and up to the Senate. Senate File 181, Drug-Induced Homicide, and Senate File 161, Parental Rights, Repealing Conflicting Statute. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Thank you.
It's like an exciting morning. Senator Stein, or Senator French.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State Lands, will meet in room 2 at 10 after 6. Got lots of info here. We'll hear the following 3 bills. Senate File 107, Acquisition, Exchange, and Sale of Trust Lands. Senate File 126, Barbering and Cosmetology Practice Amendments. Senate File 138, Unemployment Insurance Coverage Period and Reporting.
Sure you want that cosmetology one? Senator Barlow, that's an ag bill for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Privilege of the floor, Mr. President.
Privilege granted.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'd like to acknowledge that our good colleague, Senator McEwen, had a harrowing drive back today. We're glad he's back safely. 9.5 hours from Gillette to Cheyenne is a long day, so you can imagine the jitters that he dealt with today, but I'm glad he's here safely, so.
Welcome back, Senator McEwen. Yeah. Who's been itching to stand up there?
Mr. Chairman, if I could add one more thing, a report from Northeast Wyoming.
Yes.
That the lambing crew reports today there were 10 sets of twins and 1 set of triplets born. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All live, I take it?
Mr. Chairman, I've got a good lambing crew.
Holy cow, we all love Kelly. All right. Anything further? Senate will stand adjourned till